It took me many years to even think about telling this story, and you will not find it anywhere else. I do not want it shared in a way that could reveal who I am or who I am talking about. This story is heavy, and although I will leave out some details, I need to let it out because I am struggling. Maybe someone listening can help me understand what to do next. I am a 33-year-old man with 3 younger sisters. When I was very young, my parents separated. At that time, it was just me and my little sister, who is only 14 months younger than me. When I was around 10 years old, my mother remarried. She had known my stepfather for only 6 months before the wedding, and I had met him just a few times. At first, I liked him. He used to bring cookies and candy for me and my sister. Her name is Heidi, and she liked him as well. After the marriage, my mother and stepfather had another daughter, Kelly, and later, Christy. For a while, things seemed normal. We moved into a new house. I had my own room, Heidi and Kelly shared a room, and baby Christy stayed with our parents. But a few years later, things started to change. Heidi, who was now 14, began acting strangely. When I asked my mom about it, she said it was just hormones. One day, I noticed a red mark on Heidi's arm under her long sleeve. When I grabbed her arm, she winced. I pulled up her sleeve and saw cuts. My mother brushed it off, saying she just wanted attention. At that time, I thought maybe she really did need attention, but nothing changed. A few months later, I woke up to the sound of Heidi vomiting in the bathroom. At first, I did not think much of it, until I heard my mother shouting that Heidi had to end a pregnancy. That night is burned into my memory. When everything was quiet, I asked Heidi who the father was. Through tears, she whispered, "It's our stepdad." My whole body filled with rage. How could I have missed the signs? The aftermath was worse than I could have imagined. My stepfather had been hurting all of my sisters, even the youngest. At first, my mother did not believe them, but I collected proof and went to the police. He was prosecuted. On top of that, he had been using our basement to produce drugs and sell them to a motorcycle gang. With all the evidence, photos, videos, and testimony, the district attorney still only gave him 14 years. He eventually got out, and now he lives not far from us. Since then, I have been consumed by the need for revenge. At first, it was petty things, like sending pizzas to his house or posting his information online. But it never felt like enough. I dug deeper. I found his personal details, credit cards, social security number, birth records. I used them to sabotage him, report him anonymously, ruin job opportunities. Yet still, it did not feel like enough. Recently, I thought about exposing him to the motorcycle club he betrayed during his trial. They do not know he gave them up, but I can prove it was him. I want them to know. I would never share this publicly where it could be traced back to me, but here I hope someone can give me clarity, or at least help me feel that I have done something. Sometimes, late at night, I picture him finally realizing that the truth is closing in. The thought gives me chills. But no matter what I do, the fear stays with me. What if nothing I do will ever be enough to make him pay for the darkness he forced into our lives? They say the most dangerous monsters don't lurk in the shadows of forests or alleys. They wait for you in plain sight, in places you've always believed were safe. That night, I learned that even a well-lit hotel can turn into a hunting ground. Hotels are supposed to be safe for hookups, right? Sorry, I'm terrible at titles. But being bored at home during the holidays and scrolling this sub made me want to finally share what happened to me not long ago. I'm a young gay man with a high sex drive. Naturally, I use Grindr, Scruff, and all the other apps to look for connections. I've always had a thing for older men, not grandpa old, but older enough to feel like they're in control. Living in a big city should make that easier, but even then, the apps can feel painfully dry. When I don't find anyone, the smart thing would be to just deal with my urges alone and go to sleep. But like any man in his 20s, sometimes desire drowns out logic. And on those nights, I find myself chasing whatever connection feels closest at hand. I usually play it safe. I send my best friends screenshots of profiles, names, numbers, social media links, hotel room numbers, everything. I keep them updated in real time, and they're amazing at looking out for me. If a drink is involved, I make sure it's poured in front of me or sealed. I've learned to keep myself alive in this world. A couple of months ago, I cast a wider net and joined a site that catered to the older-younger crowd. It felt outdated, almost like a relic of the early internet. That's where I found him. His profile said he was 71. His first picture was grainy, oversized glasses, a sweater, a button-down shirt. He didn't look like much, but when I asked for another photo, he sent it without hesitation. Still low resolution, but without the glasses, he seemed a little more intriguing. His profile said he was from the UK, tall, imposing. I imagined the accent, the novelty of it. But his words unsettled me. He liked meeting strong-willed men, then breaking them down until they became completely submissive. It was dark, but I told myself it was just fantasy. We exchanged numbers, moved to WhatsApp. He bragged that people told him he looked like a movie star in person, that he chose bad photos on purpose so his dates would be pleasantly surprised. The arrogance was obvious, but I brushed it off. He mentioned he'd be staying downtown in a hotel weeks later. I didn't expect to follow through. But then one lonely night came. The apps were dry. My need was high. I remembered him. I texted. He responded. He was in town, waiting. I told myself hotels were safe. They had to be. When I arrived, he looked just like his pictures, only older, droopier, and infinitely colder. His shoulders hunched unnaturally, his stance exaggerated like a cartoon mocking confidence. His eyes shifted constantly, sharp and piercing when they locked on me. Something about his presence made my stomach tighten. His first words weren't even hello. He pointed to a family in the lobby and muttered how they were broken and unhappy, analyzing them with eerie detachment. His American accent shattered the British fantasy. In the elevator, he studied me like prey, commenting on the way I supposedly breathed in my sleep. He described the shape of my jaw, how my tongue pressed against my teeth at night. His voice was clinical, invasive, as if he knew my body better than I did. It was the most bizarre and unsettling 2 minutes I'd ever had with a stranger. Still, I followed him to his room. My autopilot told me to be polite, to go along, to not cause a scene. I texted my friend the room number. He saw me do it. He smiled thinly. "You don't need to send that. I'm trustworthy." Inside, the room looked ordinary.
too ordinary. But 2 glasses sat waiting on the desk, 1 wine, 1 Coke, both already poured. He started his game, asking me questions, twisting my answers into ways to belittle me. He said he never had casual sex, that men like me were dirty, that strong men like me gave him the most pleasure when they finally broke. It was dark, but I told myself it was just fantasy. We exchanged numbers, moved to WhatsApp. He bragged that people told him he looked like a movie star in person, that he chose bad photos on purpose so his dates would be pleasantly surprised. The arrogance was obvious, but I brushed it off. He mentioned he'd be staying downtown in a hotel weeks later. I didn't expect to follow through. But then one lonely night came. The apps were dry. My need was high. I remembered him. I texted. He responded. He was in town, waiting. I told myself hotels were safe. They had to be.
Some nights feel different from the start, like the city itself is holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. In New Orleans, where the streets carry ghosts and shadows whisper between the bars, I learned that not every danger wears a mask. Sometimes it follows quietly, just a step behind. This happened in New Orleans a little while back. My boyfriend, 2 other couples, and I had spent the night partying in the French Quarter. After hours of drinking and wandering through crowded bars, we finally decided to call it a night. This was long before Uber or Lyft, so we knew we'd be walking back. Earlier in the evening, the sun was still shining when we left our hotel. But now, past midnight, the streets had changed. The echoes of Bourbon Street laughter faded behind us, replaced by long stretches of dim silence. I was on crutches, not exactly a great combination with alcohol, and my pace had slowed. My 2 girlfriends, Bree and Z, were a few steps ahead, laughing about a bizarre man we had kept bumping into. He wore tights and a cape, pressing himself against bar windows like some drunken Spider-Man, staring at us for long minutes. At first it was funny, later it wasn't. Our 3 boyfriends were even farther ahead, loud and carefree, passing a cigarette and veering suddenly toward a narrow alley instead of staying on the main road. That was when unease gripped me. The alley was dark, deserted, wrong. Just before they disappeared into the shadows, the old man working a nearby food cart called out to Bree and Z. They didn't hear him. His tired eyes shifted toward me, and when they locked on mine, his expression changed. It was sharp, deliberate, like he was trying to tell me something. "All little miss, I got you right here, Shaw," he said, sliding a steaming wrap across the cart. I shook my head, about to wave him off, but then his face darkened. His voice dropped low. "No charge," he said. Something in the way he said it made my skin prickle. Then, leaning closer, his words slipped out in a near whisper only I could hear. "Don't look, but they trailin' y'all since before you crossed." My breath caught. I knew instantly what he meant. Whoever they were, they had been following us since half a block back. "They gonna roll y'all," he added, his tone clipped, urgent. My stomach twisted, but I forced my face to stay casual. He was protecting himself, too. If those men overheard him, there was no telling what they might do. I raised my voice, pretending excitement over the smell of the food, calling Bree and Z back.
They laughed, oblivious, returning with smiles as the vendor handed them steaming boudin balls. While they bit in, he leaned close to them as well, voice dropping again. "Tell them boys to stay on the main road, well lit, busy, no dark alleys." The alcohol buzz drained from us in an instant. Reality hit. We had been careless, stupid, trusting the night just because we were in a group. Using the cart as cover, we risked a glance. And there they were, 3 men standing a few storefronts away, watching us. Their body language pretended indifference, but the moment my eyes locked with theirs, they snapped away too quickly. The air around them felt wrong, thick, charged with something predatory. And the Cape Man? He wasn't among them, which only made the night more disturbing. There wasn't just one creep following us. There were many. The vendor had seen the danger long before we did. Without his warning, we would have vanished into that alley, blind to what waited for us. To this day, I don't know what would have happened if we had gone through. Would we have been robbed, beaten, or worse? Would we have ever made it out at all? I never got to properly thank that vendor, but his quiet warning stayed with me all these years. He didn't just hand us food, he handed us our safety, maybe even our lives. And I still wonder what was waiting in that alley, patient and hungry, had he not spoken up.
No one ever warned me about the true price of stability. It doesn't announce itself at first. It slowly seeps through the cracks in your life, quietly and relentlessly. I married a 40-year-old man when I was 19. We started dating when I was 17. Yes, it was gross, but that's what happened. No romantic whirlwind, no grand love story, none of that existed. The truth is, I married him for his money. He married me because I was young and beautiful. That was our trade. Everyone knew it, even if they didn't say it aloud. He had what I wanted, I had what he wanted. Do I have redeeming qualities? Yes. I am kind, intelligent, capable. But none of that mattered in the equation of our marriage. It wasn't my personality that sealed the deal. It was my body, my youth, my appearance. That was my currency, and I spent it willingly. We've been married 20 years. We have 4 children. Our lives are comfortable, stable, predictable. We've grown to share interests, and we love each other in the way people do when they build a life together. But if I could go back and slap some sense into my teenage self, I wouldn't hesitate. Because no one tells you that when you marry for money, you owe him every single day, in every way. It's not just about sex. It's about power, control, and a subtle imbalance that seeps into every interaction, every conversation, every decision. It doesn't matter that I gave him 4 children. It doesn't matter that I've managed our home, our lives, our day-to-day existence for 2 decades. It doesn't matter that I've been a wife, a mother, a confidant. The fundamental structure of our marriage never changes. He is the provider, I am the recipient, and that debt never disappears. You feel it in every glance, every sigh, every choice that isn't entirely yours. Your life becomes woven with it like a spider's web, impossible to escape. The creepiest part is no one sees this,
quiet, suffocating prison. People think money erases hardship, but there is a special kind of loneliness that comes with this life. My friends in golden cages understand me, yet I can't tell them I sometimes feel like a kept woman, unsure if I ever truly loved him. We drink our wine, laugh too loudly, compare our children, homes, and bags, because no one can cry first. I don't hate my life. I have comfort, stability, children I adore. But there is also a slow, gnawing regret, the kind that settles over years like a dull ache in your bones. Regret that I never got to fall in love the way young girls are supposed to, that I sold myself before I even knew who I was. My eldest daughter is almost the age I was when I met him. The thought of her making the same choice churns my stomach. I want to warn her, you don't just marry a man, you marry the imbalance. You marry the expectations. You marry that quiet debt that will never be repaid. But I stay silent, knowing even if I spoke, she wouldn't hear. And so I lie in the silence of our luxurious house, the whispers of the past wrapping around me. It's not the end, it's just another night in the cage I built 20 years ago. And that sense, that shadow lurking even in happiness, it is the creepiest of all.
It all started innocently, or so it seemed. I have a confession that I can't bear to confess to the one person I wish I could tell. Instead, I'm spilling it to the void of the internet, hoping no one ever connects the dots. My confession is that I'm the reason my work bestie was fired, and now her life has been thrown into chaos. I'm a 35-year-old woman, and almost every day I wrestle with the weight of what I did. When I was a kid, I had no clear vision for my future. My parents are immigrants, so the ideal careers were doctor, lawyer, engineer, or dentist, but none of that felt right for me. I gravitated towards science in school, figuring I could tolerate medical school. But when the time came for admissions tests, I failed miserably on practice exams. I pivoted, took the LSAT instead, and surprisingly did well. I was accepted into a prestigious law school. I wasn't sure law was my calling, but my parents' excitement carried me forward. After law school, I landed a job at a top 10 New York City firm. I was miserable. My unhappiness started affecting my work, but in big law, it's notoriously difficult to get fired. I knew I needed a change. Consulting a recruiter, I shifted toward attorney development, managing junior lawyers and staffing them for projects. This was a better fit. I loathed legal work itself. Soon, I met Sarah, a junior associate. She was brilliant, ambitious, and always said yes. We became inseparable at work, texting, complaining about colleagues, sharing lunches, making even miserable days bearable. But Sarah's drive was unsustainable. I warned her to slow down, to decline some projects, but she ignored me. Her ambition was relentless, but her choices soon backfired. She began burning out, withdrawing, becoming reclusive. Yet our friendship endured. She still sent her witty, sharp texts that made my day. Sarah's workload had once been leveraged at 125%, well above expectations. By the time burnout hit, she was at 75% capacity. That alone wouldn't have been catastrophic, except that because we were friends, I kept staffing her on projects. She'd agree, then back out or underperform. Partners complained. I had to restaff repeatedly. It was stressful, frustrating, and I didn't know how to address it with her. She couldn't take criticism well. Then came the fateful meeting. My boss, Lauren, called me into the glass-walled conference room with managing partners. I feared for my job. Instead, they asked about Sarah. I explained that her work had suffered and multiple partners had raised concerns. Then, without thinking, I blurted, "I think we should fire her." Just like that, my words sealed her fate. Lauren looked shocked, but the decision was now in motion. Minutes later, I texted Sarah a fabricated story about an email issue to keep her calm. She believed me. A week later, I learned she had been fired without notice. I pretended to be shocked, took her out for drinks, listened to her cries, comforted her with lies. I was the architect of her professional downfall. Years have passed. Sarah is now Auntie Sarah to my daughter. We remain close, talking almost every day. She struggles financially, haunted by the abrupt loss of her high-paying job. And I carry the secret, a shadow over our friendship, the truth that I orchestrated her fall. She will never know. Sometimes, late at night, I picture the moment she opened that termination notice. I feel a chill thinking how fragile trust and ambition are. I loved my work bestie, and yet I destroyed her. This happened nearly 20 years ago, during a sweltering summer in the dense, dark woods of northern Michigan. My friend Kathy, 18, my boyfriend's half-sister May, 16, and I, 17, were driving back from visiting friends in Kathy's Little Geo. And when I say Little Geo, I mean a literal disaster waiting to happen. Engine overheating, sputtering, stalling at the worst possible moments. We'd survived the trip down without major problems, but as the clock crept past midnight, roughly an hour from home, the car betrayed us. The narrow, twisting road disappeared into pitch-black woods. My vision, impaired by albinism, made everything blur and shadowy. The trees loomed like silent, faceless watchers. Then, on a descent, the Geo let out a sound that made my stomach drop. Smoke curled ominously from under the hood, and the engine sputtered to silence. Phones were useless. The dense forest swallowed any signal, and suddenly we were trapped. I ran up the hill behind the car, hoping to catch a signal. Branches scraped my arms, leaves brushed my face, and every shadow seemed to move with intent. At the top, I finally got a weak signal and called my boyfriend Caleb. Relief surged as he promised to come. But then the woods came alive. A rustling, whispering, swishing sound surrounded us. 3 distinct swishes echoed from behind the car. I froze. Every instinct screamed danger. The sounds crept closer, paused, then retreated. My heart pounded as I tried to locate the source. Shadows shifted unnaturally. Something tall and thin moved through them with a rhythm both eerie and deliberate. My friends were gone when I returned to the car, just a whisper of panic in the darkness. Then he appeared. The man we later called Corduroy emerged from the shadows. Tall, lean, with long sleeves hanging like grotesque flopping arms. His eyes gleamed in the sparse light of the Geo's failing headlights. He moved unnervingly, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, the swishing echoing through the woods like some sinister chant.
We didn't scream. Our bodies were paralyzed with fear. He pressed his face against the window, lingering just long enough to make us feel trapped, powerless. My mind raced. What does he want? Why is he here? His movements weren't chaotic. They were ritualistic, predatory, almost hypnotic. Time stretched unbearably. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves made our hearts jump. Kathy trembled violently, May whispered prayers, and I clutched my own arms as if they could shield me from him. He circled the geo, slamming branches against the windows with precision, each strike a cruel reminder of our vulnerability. And then headlights, the salvation of Caleb and Alex. They arrived like angels, but Corduroy was not done. He lunged, swished, and struck, but Caleb and Alex held their ground. In that tense, surreal standoff, Corduroy finally retreated, melting into the black woods, leaving only dread and unanswered questions. Even after we escaped, the horror didn't end. Returning the next day, we found my cigarettes, gone, shoved neatly through a window that never fully closed. It was a subtle, sinister signature. Corduroy had been there, silent, watching, leaving a mark to remind us he could return. Years later, the memory still haunts me. Every rustle in the wind, every shadow in a parking lot triggers that same cold dread. I think about how close we came to true terror, how lucky we were to escape without injury, and how helpless I felt in the face of someone so methodical and disturbed. The woods of northern Michigan had shown me their darkest secret. Predators don't always reveal themselves outright, and danger can lurk in silence, watching, waiting.
Looking back now, I realize that what seemed like just another hectic job at a popular theme park turned into one of the most terrifying periods of my life. I was 22, a female, juggling college and 2 other jobs, working long hours, barely sleeping, not eating properly, and constantly surrounded by hundreds of strangers and their germs. At the time, I thought I was just exhausted, but the truth was far more sinister. One busy holiday weekend, I picked up a late shift for some extra pay. I was assigned to a high-traffic area, and the 3 or 4 of us running the spot were quickly overwhelmed. At one point, a guest parked his family on a walkway, and when I politely asked him to move, he became confrontational, shouting in my face about ruining his vacation. I froze, my body tense and every nerve screaming. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw a shadow behind me. A large man in a uniform similar to mine appeared, staring down the belligerent guest. Behind him was another man, equally large, warning the guest to move or security would be called. Relief washed over me as the guest finally left, and the 2 men stayed nearby for the rest of the evening, silent guardians who ensured I wasn't bothered again. One of them, a man I would later call Mac, started asking questions about my life and which areas of the park I usually worked. I was grateful for the distraction, answering him for hours as we finished our shifts. At the end of the evening, he asked for my phone number. I gave it to him, even though I didn't feel any attraction. He had helped me that night, and I thought it was the least I could do. We went on a date a week later. It was short, and I quickly realized I wasn't interested in anything more than friendship.
When I tried to turn him down, his face flushed with anger, and he forced an overly long hug before I could walk away. That night, my phone began buzzing relentlessly. Text after text, paragraphs declaring that we were meant to be, that fate had brought us together, that I was his damsel in distress. After countless messages telling him I didn't feel the same, I finally blocked his number. But the nightmare didn't end there. A few days later, coworkers asked if I was dating a manager named Mac. He had apparently been telling people we were going steady. I denied it repeatedly, my stomach twisting into knots every time I thought of him. Then came the encounter that would haunt me. I saw him near the payroll office, seemingly waiting for someone. Before I could avoid him, he spotted me and ran up, smiling, but there was something wrong about that smile. His eyes were too wide, his face contorted with a strange mixture of anger and obsession. He tried to grab my arm, insisting he would give me a ride home. I dodged him and slipped into the crowd, my heart hammering so violently I thought it might burst. Days later, my body betrayed me again. I fell seriously ill, not realizing that my antibiotics were ineffective. I kept taking them, growing weaker by the hour, until my roommate came home to find me gasping for air. I was rushed to the ER, diagnosed with pneumonia, and admitted. That first night, one of my lungs collapsed. I was terrified, lying in that hospital bed, surrounded by machines and the constant hum of monitors. And then he appeared, Mac, carrying flowers, smiling that same creepy smile. My heart froze. The nurse call button was broken. There was no one else around. He sat beside my bed, gripping my hand too tightly, whispering that he was worried about me and wanted to check on his girl. The heart monitor beeped wildly. I could barely breathe, and I could barely speak. When a nurse finally entered, she immediately recognized the danger in his presence and told him to leave. He did, but not before promising he would return. For the next 2 weeks, I remained in the hospital, terrified of what he might do if he found out where I was. The nurses' quick thinking, their vigilance, probably saved me from further trauma. When I finally recovered enough to return home, I remained hyper-aware, scanning parking lots and hallways, never going anywhere alone. I later learned that he had been quietly transferred to another park, but the memory of those weeks, the suffocating fear, stayed with me long after. Even now, years later, I can still feel the weight of it, the way his obsession escalated, the way ordinary life turned into a constant, creeping terror. The theme park, the shifts, the cheerful facade of my coworkers, all of it was shadowed by the lurking presence of a man who refused to accept reality, who believed he had a right to my life, my choices, my body. I never saw him again, and I am beyond grateful for that.
When I was 19, I started working for a company that sent employees to remote areas of Australia. The main purpose of the job was simple. You reported when you were available to work, and they sent you to a farm for a few weeks to do whatever was needed. It was hard labor, long hours, but the pay was good. And if you happened to find the right people to work with, it could even be enjoyable. That summer, I was sent to a massive property that I was told was roughly the size of the state of Maryland. It was about a 9-hour drive from Sydney. The nearest town was 40 minutes down an empty road, truly the middle of nowhere. I worked on the farm, clearing scrub and brush, alongside 3 other guys my age from the city. Our supervisor, Jeremy, was the owner of the property. He helped us and oversaw the work.
He was calm, generally friendly, and treated us well. The heat that summer was relentless. One day, when the thermometer read about 100 degrees Fahrenheit, 38 degrees Celsius, Jeremy decided to give us a day off. He said he knew of a water hole on the property, about a 25-minute drive to the north. I was desperate to swim, but the other guys just wanted to relax. So Jeremy and I got into the work truck and drove through the vast, empty landscape. The road cut through the endless flat land, dotted with occasional scrubby trees. Jeremy didn't talk much, so the drive was mostly silent. After about 20 minutes, he suddenly perked up and pointed to something in the distance. "See that, under those two dead trees?" If you're not familiar with the remote areas of Australia, the land there is mostly brown and red, flat and monotonous. Anything bright immediately catches your eye. And there it was, a strange, unnatural sight. A large blue shipping container sitting alone in the barren land. Jeremy was baffled. He hadn't seen it 5 weeks ago when he drove this way. We approached it cautiously, stopping about 100 meters away. I felt a chill creep over me, an instinctive sense that something was very wrong. Jeremy insisted we investigate. As we drew closer, the details became even more unsettling. A massive diesel generator thrummed behind it, and surveillance cameras on both sides of the container tracked our movements. My heart pounded as the sense of dread grew. The container's door had only a small padlock. We used bolt cutters to open it. The first thing that hit me was a cold blast of air. The container was air-conditioned. Inside, rows of computer equipment blinked with countless LEDs, emitting a low, ominous hum. We cautiously moved among the tables, staring at monitors filled with endless streams of data, cryptic files, charts, and lists. It looked like some twisted network, recording every movement, every location, every person. My mind screamed for me to leave, but I couldn't look away. Then I noticed a stack of boxes. Trembling, I began rifling through one. What I found nearly froze my blood. Neatly organized posters, DVDs, photographs, all depicting grotesque, disturbing scenes of people, organized and meticulous. I tried to warn Jeremy, but his face had gone pale, and we bolted back to the truck, desperate to call the authorities. The property's isolation meant the police took nearly an hour to arrive. When we returned to the container, it was already open, and inside a fire burned. The small extinguishers we carried were useless against the inferno. Whoever had been running this operation knew we were coming. They had destroyed the evidence in time. In the years since, Jeremy and I kept in touch. The container still sits on the property, too costly to remove. Who used it and for what purpose remains a mystery. But I will never forget the things I saw inside those boxes. For me, that container is one of the most horrifying places on Earth. Sometimes at night, I wake up and hear in my mind the cold hum of the servers, like thousands of silent victims screaming across the emptiness. I see shadows moving between the blinking lights, and I feel a weight pressing down on me, as if the container's horror had followed me home. Over the following months, I started noticing strange things in my daily life. Unmarked vans would drive past my apartment late at night, and I sometimes saw shadows at the edge of my vision. Phones would ring with no one on the other end. I couldn't explain it, It was as if the container's sinister reach had extended far beyond the farm. One night, I dreamed I was back at the container. The doors swung open on their own, and the cold hum filled my ears. The boxes were gone, replaced by a dark void. And from that void, hundreds of pale faces stared at me, mouths silently screaming. I woke up drenched in sweat, unable to move, feeling a presence in my room. I have never returned to that part of Australia, and I never will. But the memory haunts me every day. Every time I hear a generator hum or see a blinking light in the dark, I feel that same chill, the reminder that some horrors never leave, and some secrets are meant to remain buried. Even now, years later, I sometimes wonder if the container still waits out there, hidden among the dead trees, its cameras watching, its hum whispering, patiently waiting for the next unlucky soul to stumble upon it.
It started as an ordinary decision in my mid-20s, joining the army. But looking back now, I realize that ordinary choice unknowingly placed me side by side with someone capable of unimaginable darkness. Basic training is intense, physically, mentally, socially, and it forces you into a unit with people from every imaginable background. Different races, religions, personalities, life experiences. The goal is to break you down, then rebuild you. And it's through shared misery that bonds form with people you'd never normally meet. That's how I met him, Dad. It was the first week of training. Oddly enough, we had almost nothing in common. He was from the Southwest, I was from New England. Our closeness was purely logistical. Our bunks were assigned alphabetically, placing us right next to each other. That meant he was the last face I saw before lights out, the first one at wake up, and the person I got smoked next to during every drill sergeant's push-up session. We spent long hours cleaning weapons, marching for hours in the sun, running obstacle courses, and just killing time together. Yet there was always something off about him. He asked strange, unsettling questions. "Are you really willing to die for this country?" he asked once during a long night when the barracks were silent except for the hum of the fluorescent lights. I told him, no, I'd go AWOL for my family. But he spoke about such things with a chilling certainty, like he had already made peace with unimaginable acts. He had no hesitation in admitting he joined the army just to leave town. Before enlisting, he had been deeply involved in cooking and using meth. I had no knowledge of that world, and I didn't touch drugs anyway, so there was nothing I could say. But even stranger was his habit of smuggling contraband: tobacco, porn, instant coffee. He would hide it in letters glued together, slipping them through the mail check. To him, it was a game, a thrill he bragged about endlessly, and the way he described it made it sound almost like a badge of honor. Then came the fight. What began as wrestling between him and another recruit escalated into full-blown violence within moments. Fists were thrown. The sounds of grunts and blows echoed in the barracks. It took several of us to separate them. Looking back, it never felt like a harmless tussle. It felt like we had glimpsed something darker beneath the surface, a capacity for aggression that terrified me without my fully realizing why. Despite all the oddities, there was one topic he never stopped talking about: his wife. He constantly spoke about missing her, how amazing she was, how she was the only one for him.
He painted vivid pictures of their life together, recounting memories in minute detail, as though she were right there with him. At the time, I thought it was simply longing, understandable in the harsh world of basic training. We graduated together, then went our separate ways. Occasionally, I would see him at the same base, trying to strike up a conversation, only for him to act like he didn't know me or recall shared memories that never happened. I thought he was being eccentric or difficult, but the truth would later reveal itself in a far more sinister light. 3 years later, scrolling Facebook one night, I saw a news article shared by another former recruit. The headline screamed, "Ex-soldier arrested for murder and arson." My stomach dropped. It was him. The article described how he had been discharged from the army, then returned home, only to murder his ex-wife's new boyfriend and set the house ablaze. She had left him years before he enlisted, long before we met in basic training. Yet he had lived in complete denial, creating a delusional world where she still belonged to him. He left threatening notes taped to her door with no concern for getting caught. Within a day, he was arrested. Every word he had spoken about longing to see his wife, every story he told during training, it was a chilling glimpse into the delusions simmering beneath the surface. I found myself haunted by countless memories I had dismissed at the time. The intensity in his eyes when he spoke about her, the way he would sometimes stare at nothing, whispering to himself, the small but frequent acts that hinted at a need for control and obsession far beyond normal longing. I remembered nights where I could swear he was planning something, though I had no way of knowing what. What chills me to this day is the terrifying realization that for 3 months I had shared almost every moment of daily life with a man who could commit such acts, and I never had any clue. The smiles, the conversations, the shared misery, they masked something truly monstrous. The Army teaches you to survive physical and mental stress, but it cannot teach you to recognize the darkness in another human being before it's too late. For anyone curious, the news article is linked below. This all happened in 2015, just after Christopher Green's arrest. He was later found guilty of first-degree murder, arson, and aggravated burglary. He is serving life without the possibility of parole for 50 years in the Oklahoma Department of Corrections. Even now, years later, I can't stop replaying the memories, haunted by the realization of how close I came to witnessing and perhaps being caught up in his unthinkable acts.
I'm a 31-year-old guy. My ex-wife, Claire, is 35. We got married when I was 21, fresh out of college, and stayed together for 5 years. From the outside, everything seemed perfect. I had a stable job in IT, just like I do now. We didn't fight much. Our life together felt solid, or at least I thought it did. Even our second life was great. But then, as if someone had flipped a switch, everything changed. A few months before I discovered her betrayal, Claire became distant. The woman who once initiated everything, who laughed, flirted, and reached out for me constantly, suddenly lost interest. What had been a near daily intimacy dwindled to once a week, then to nothing. I didn't understand why, until I found out. I discovered it in the dumbest, most accidental way. Claire left her phone on the table, screen unlocked. I wasn't snooping, I just glanced at it. And there it was, a naked selfie sent to a number I didn't recognize. My stomach dropped. I clicked the messages. Full-blown affair. Every single detail in black and white.
She had been sleeping with some guy from the gym I was paying for. And not just anywhere, they were in our bed, most of the time. I didn't need to confront her. The texts said it all. I stayed quiet, waiting. The following Saturday, I knew she'd be at her so-called double yoga class, which was probably just a cover for her trysts. I packed my things, loaded the car, and left. I'd already spoken to a divorce attorney. I knew I'd be fine. We had no kids. She'd inherited $200,000 from her father, so financial struggles weren't an issue. She had a degree and a career. There was no reason she could come after me for money. I left the divorce papers on the kitchen table, and that was it. As expected, later that day, Claire started blowing up my phone. Apologies, begging, claiming she made a mistake. I ignored her. That's when her friends started calling, accusing me of cowardice. If you truly loved her, you wouldn't have disappeared, they said. I ignored them too. The only person I called was the wife of the man she had been cheating with. He was dumped, and it seemed to clear the path for Claire and the gym guy to get married just a few months after our divorce was finalized. No alimony, no drawn-out legal battle, a clean break. During the court hearing, she couldn't look at me, but she brought her soon-to-be fiancé. The whole time he tried to act tough, flexing as if he wanted a confrontation. I just shook my head. Enjoy what you signed up for, I thought. Since then, I went on a few dates, had a few flings, but no real relationships. I don't love Claire anymore, and she destroyed my ability to trust people. At least I reconnected with old friends, ones I had lost touch with because she didn't like me having a social life. Facebook became meaningless. If someone matters, I see them in person or call. Claire seemed to have moved on, until last week. Out of nowhere, she started texting me again. At first, casual. "Hey, it's Claire, long time no see." Or, "I know I messed up. Can we talk?" Then the calls began, 12 missed calls in a row. I ignored them all. Then the messages became desperate. "Op, is this still your number? I talked to one of our old friends. He said you still use it. Can you please respond? I miss you. You were the only man who was ever good to me. AP is a bastard. He hurts me. I made the biggest mistake of my life throwing you away." Even then, I ignored her. But she started listing the ways he was hurting her, and I reached my limit. I had zero interest in getting involved, but I didn't want to ignore something serious. So I texted a mutual acquaintance, the same one who had called me a coward years ago, but someone I still spoke to occasionally. I told him what Claire was claiming, and that if it was true, her friends and he needed to handle it. I didn't care anymore. I said bluntly, I don't care if she starves in the street or dies. Maybe her friends care. Harsh, yes, but that was how I felt. His response, "You're a monster. You're evil. How can you just leave her like this?" I told him to get lost and blocked him for the first time in forever. Then I logged into Facebook. Unsurprisingly, everyone who had sided with Claire back then now flooded my inbox, criticizing me. "Where were you when she cheated?" they asked. "Where were you when I was left picking up the pieces of my life? Where were you when I tried to move on?" They expected me to care now that her life wasn't perfect? Nope, not happening. I took screenshots of all her texts, old and new, and posted them publicly. Every message where she begged me not to divorce, admitted to cheating, claimed the other guy meant nothing, and all those people who had criticized me before, silent. Claire is still texting me, accusing me of being cruel, saying I never loved her, calling me a bad person. I haven't replied, and I never will. For the first time in years, I feel at peace. I don't wish her harm. I don't wish her happiness either. I just don't care. She made her choice, I made mine, and finally, the nightmare that had haunted me for years has ended. The silence now is my revenge. Not the kind that destroys, but the kind that finally frees me. And for the first time, that peace feels terrifyingly, intoxicatingly permanent.
There's a saying in life that everyone likes to preach. You're not supposed to take pleasure in someone else's suffering. Be the bigger person, forgive, move on. But sometimes the universe doesn't give you a choice. Sometimes the universe gives you a sign, a moment, a chance to feel a truth you've been denied for far too long. Last week, I found out that 3 of my childhood bullies had been in a devastating car accident. This wasn't a minor fender bender. It was brutal, life-altering. One had a punctured lung. Another suffered a heart attack while in a coma, and together they endured broken ribs, concussions, shattered arms, and an endless catalogue of agonizing injuries. And when I heard, my chest tightened with something, not sorrow, not fear, but relief. I know how cruel that sounds, maybe even sick, but hear me out. These were the people who had made my childhood a living nightmare. From 2nd grade all the way to our high school graduation, they never stopped. They mocked, shoved, humiliated, tormented me daily. At first, it was playground cruelty, cruel nicknames, trips, laughter when tears fell. But as we got older, it escalated into relentless psychological warfare. I became the punching bag for their boredom. Lockers, toilets, books tossed across the room, social media harassment, anonymous messages telling me the world would be better off without me. I was depressed before I even understood what depression was. High school didn't offer an escape. It amplified the horror. I stopped speaking between 8 a.m. and 3 p.m. I stopped raising my hand in class. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see a person anymore. I saw someone weak, ugly, unworthy. And the cruel thing? I believed them. I absorbed every taunt, every humiliation, until it fused with my very identity. People say bullying fades when school ends. That's a lie. It doesn't fade. It sinks into your skin, into your bones, into the way you see the world. Anxiety, trust issues, depression, the ghosts of those years followed me like shadows. Every interaction was a test, a moment to see if the world would remind me of what I already knew, that people could be cruel without reason. And then, the universe intervened. The accident was shocking, yes, but my reaction wasn't grief. It was validation. Justice, finally, in a form I didn't have to fabricate or forgive. No flowers, no apologies, just the stark, undeniable truth that life had finally balanced, even just slightly. They had felt a fraction of the terror and helplessness they had inflicted on me. I didn't orchestrate it, I didn't wish it. But when someone spends years breaking you into pieces, do you really owe them empathy when the scales tip? For the first time in decades, I felt seen. For the first time, I felt that the universe acknowledged the weight I had carried alone for so long.
Some may say holding on to hate is poisonous. Maybe. But this wasn't hate. This was validation. This was the universe whispering back to me, I see you. I haven't forgotten. And for the first time in my life, I felt a flicker of peace, raw and unfiltered, shining through the long darkness of what they had done. I'm not saying I want them to suffer forever. I'm not saying I hope they never heal. But I am saying this: for once, the cruelty was not mine to bear alone. And for once, that felt terrifyingly, beautifully good.
There are mistakes you can fix, and then there are those that stay with you forever. Most childhood mistakes seem small: forgetting homework, breaking a window, maybe sneaking out past curfew. But then there are the other kinds, the ones that burrow into you, haunting your mind every day like a cruel, endless highlight reel of what-ifs. For me, it was a phone call. One short, simple call I forgot about, and because of it, a woman died. I was 13 or 14 at the time, old enough to stay home alone, but still at that phase where nothing outside of video games and my little bubble of life mattered. My mom had been a nurse her whole life. She knew how to take care of people. Not a doctor, not famous, but in our small town, many counted on her. Her best friend from childhood had an elderly mother who had been sick for a long time. I don't remember exactly what was wrong, but it was serious enough that she needed constant care. Because of their friendship, my mom was happy to help. Daily visits, bandages, medications, errands, whatever was needed. She never complained. She saved lives for a living, and this was just another person she wanted to help. To me, a child, it was just background noise, normal, until it wasn't. That day, my mom had gone out of town, and I was home alone. I don't remember why, maybe work, maybe a short trip. I was sitting at the computer playing MapleStory, a bright 2D game that demanded grinding levels endlessly. Nothing else mattered. Then the phone rang. My mom's friend's voice was frantic even before she spoke. "Can you have your mom call me when she gets home? It's an emergency. Her wound won't stop bleeding. I don't know what to do." I said I'd let her know, and went back to my game. 15 minutes later, my mom returned, and I forgot completely. Hours passed until the phone rang again. Only this time it was different. I heard it in my mom's voice, the shift from confusion to near horror as she listened. Her best friend's mother had died. She had bled out. No one came in time to help. I watched my mom process the news. She could have been there, could have stopped the bleeding, but she didn't know. And I did. I had one job, one, and I failed. I've spent years wondering why they never called again, why they didn't try harder. But the burden of that knowledge became mine alone. I didn't tell my mom as she grieved. I didn't tell her as she wrestled with guilt. I didn't tell her because I knew it would destroy her. So I destroyed myself instead. Years later, I think about it almost every day. Would that woman have lived longer if my mom had been there in time? Did I steal months, maybe years from her life with my forgetfulness? I'll never know. Intentions don't erase consequences. That woman died,
and I played a part. Some mistakes you can fix. Some become part of you. Some you never get a second chance to make right. I never tell this story out loud, but I live with it every day, and I don't think I'll ever truly forgive myself.
I've never really talked about this. Not to my family, not to my closest friends, except for the few who were there that night. It's been years, but some things don't fade. Some moments carve themselves into your memory, replaying relentlessly, no matter how desperately you try to silence them. This is one of those moments. I was in college at the time, part of a fraternity, living the kind of life you expect from someone in their early 20s. Parties, late nights, schoolwork I probably didn't take as seriously as I should have. That night, I was out picking up liquor for a party we were planning for the following evening. It should have been a simple, mundane errand, but that night, the ordinary turned into something horrific. The road I took was one I'd driven hundreds of times before. It was dark, but not deserted. Streetlights cast long shadows that danced across the pavement like silent specters. Everything felt normal, just another quiet evening drive. I don't even remember why I looked down at my radio. Maybe I was changing the station, maybe adjusting the volume. It was just a second, 1 second. But when I looked back up, he was already there. There was no time to react. I couldn't swerve, couldn't brake in time. By the time my brain processed that someone was crossing the street, it was already too late. I felt the impact before I fully saw it, the heavy, sickening thud as a body hit the hood of my car, rolling briefly before tumbling off to the side. It's a sound I still hear when I close my eyes at night. I screamed, slammed on the brakes. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might explode. For one brief, horrifying moment, the thought flashed through my mind. Just hit the gas, drive, pretend it never happened. Maybe no one would know. Maybe I could escape it. But deep down, I knew I couldn't. I pulled over, hands shaking so violently I could barely shift the car into park. I jumped out and ran to where he had landed, my legs threatening to give out beneath me. When I reached him, I realized his family was already there. They had been standing by the restaurant he'd just left and had seen everything. Their screams pierced the night, raw and broken, ripping through me like knives. He was lying on the pavement, his body twisted unnaturally, blood streaming from his nose and mouth. 2 men crouched beside him, desperately trying to do something, anything, but it was already clear he was beyond help. I stood frozen, then collapsed onto the curb, my hands clawing at my own hair, my entire body trembling. I kept repeating, over and over, I didn't see him. I didn't see him. It was all I could think. But what did it matter? He was dying because of that 1 second I looked away. Paramedics arrived quickly. I watched as they lifted him onto a stretcher, red and blue lights flashing across the pavement, his family's screams echoing in my ears. And then, something happened that I still cannot fully comprehend. His wife walked over to me. I had been curled in on myself, sobbing harder than I ever had. I couldn't face her. I expected rage, cursing, anger, but instead, she sat beside me, placed a hand on my shoulder, and she said nothing. She had been married to him for almost 50 years. She said they had a good life. And then
She hugged me. She forgave me. I was speechless. How do you respond to that? Her simple act nearly broke me. And as I watched them load him into the ambulance, part of me went with him that night. Legally, it was ruled an accident, no charges. I hadn't been drinking, I hadn't been speeding, there were no drugs in my system. One of my friends picked me up from the police station. I don't remember the drive home. I don't remember what I said. I barely remember the next few weeks. But I remember the guilt. It pressed on me like a weight every second of every day. I drank to escape it, heavily. I stopped going to class, stopped caring about anything. By senior year, I had dropped out completely. I couldn't hold a job, couldn't be responsible. I moved back in with my parents because I felt I had no other choice. I had hit rock bottom and kept digging. One night, I swallowed a handful of pills. I just wanted out. But somewhere, deep in the haze, I realized I didn't want to die. That was the night I decided to crawl out of the hole I had spent so long digging for myself. Recovery was slow and painful. I'll never fully recover, but piece by piece, I started putting myself back together. I joined the Navy, not out of some noble desire to serve, but because I needed discipline, structure, something to prevent me from completely withering away. It worked. I saw parts of the world I never imagined. I met people who helped me find purpose again. And now, after nearly a decade, I'm finally on track to go back to school and finish what I started. It took years. It took everything I had left. But I'm here. And for the first time since that night, I feel like I might actually deserve to be. There are some things you never get over. Time doesn't heal wounds. It only teaches you how to carry the weight. I still think of his forgiveness. I can still hear his family screaming. I still replay that single second when I took my eyes off the road. But after all these years, I can go out again, be with friends, live my life. Maybe, just maybe, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. And if there is, I think I'm finally starting to see it.
People love to tell stories about their crazy exes. It's almost like a badge of honor, a way to prove you survived the impossible. But nothing prepares you for someone whose insanity isn't just harmless chaos. It's calculated, obsessive, and destructive. I dated a woman who was criminally insane. Not the kind of crazy you laugh about, the slashed tires or silly arguments type. This was darkness incarnate, infiltrating my life like a parasite, leaving wounds that wouldn't heal for years. When I met her, she seemed normal, ex-military, sober, grounded. At first, honestly, she was almost comforting. I was at one of the lowest points in my life, desperately clinging to anything that would make me feel alive. So I ignored the small, insidious red flags, the tiny flickers of unease that, in hindsight, were warnings screaming in silence. I wanted something, anything, that would make my life feel less empty. I soon uttered the 3 most dangerous words of my life. I love you. That was when the cracks began to show, and the true horror revealed itself. She didn't just doubt me. She twisted my words into weaponized accusations, making it feel like I had committed some unforgivable crime simply by expressing my feelings. Her eyes, once calm, flickered with something dark, a storm I hadn't noticed at first. Then things escalated. I was living in a run-down motel, a place that only amplified our chaos. One fight, small at first, spiraled into a nightmare. I asked her to leave. She refused. I threatened to call the police. Before I could touch my phone, she had beaten me to it, calling them with false claims of abuse. But when the police arrived, they saw through the act. Maybe they sensed the madness radiating from her. One officer, seeing my exhaustion, whispered, "Stay away from the crazy ones." I wish I had listened sooner. After escaping that motel, I tried to rebuild. I moved into a new place, thinking a fresh start would erase the terror. But it didn't last. One day, she called, voice trembling, feigning regret, claiming she wanted to make things right. I almost fell for it. Almost. I let my guard down just enough to answer a single question. "Where are you living now?" That tiny slip was all she needed to infiltrate my life again. Through a terrifying stroke of luck, or her unrelenting cunning, she found a back door. She befriended my landlord's girlfriend, slowly embedding herself into my world. Months passed as she lurked in the shadows, twisting reality, poisoning minds, turning everyone around me against me. My home was no longer a sanctuary. It became a cage filled with invisible threats. I couldn't relax. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't escape the constant gnawing dread. Warnings went ignored until one night she finally snapped. Manic, uninvited, she appeared at my door, refusing to leave, screaming and clawing at the boundaries of my life. It was only then that my landlord and his girlfriend understood the depth of what I had endured. They physically removed her and threatened the police. For a moment, I thought the nightmare was over. It wasn't. The next day, she appeared at my workplace, screaming at my boss, calling him a liar when he said I wasn't there. She was hunting me, and the only way to escape was to vanish completely. Within a week, I moved again. No roommates, no shared spaces, just me. Over the next few years, I uprooted my entire life, moving across the country to ensure I would never see her again. A year later, curiosity dawned at me. I looked her up online. What I found was horrifying. DUIs, assaults, drug charges, arrests every few months. Her life had become a self-inflicted descent into chaos. She rarely spent time outside of jail, her criminal record piling higher with each passing month. Her most recent charge was something minor, yet it guaranteed more time behind bars. I felt nothing but relief. She was someone else's problem now. But even as I breathed easier, a part of me shivered. The memory of her twisted grin, the way she could worm into anyone's life and manipulate reality, it haunts me still. Some people don't just break your heart, they invade your entire existence, leaving a trail of fear that lingers long after you've escaped. And though I moved thousands of miles away, though I rebuilt every piece of my life, I know that a shadow like that doesn't truly disappear. You can only hope that you outrun it, and pray that one day it vanishes entirely into the darkness it came from. There's a lot people tell you to do when someone you love gets hurt. Report it, get help, trust the system. But what happens when the system fails? When the person who victimized someone you love is still out there walking free? When the person you love can't sleep at night, haunted by fear and shame, what then? Last year, my boyfriend was assaulted. He didn't tell me when it happened. He didn't tell anyone. He carried it silently, alone, because the man who did it looked him straight in the eyes and threatened to kill him if he went to the police. I only found out about it this week. When I did, something inside me shifted. I already knew whispers about this man, stories that circulated quietly in our small, tight-knit community. Ex-girlfriends had spoken in hushed tones about things that never reached the authorities. Crimes, threats, patterns of abuse that should have been stopped, but weren't. And yet here he was, still walking free, probably convinced he was untouchable. Meanwhile, my boyfriend had carried this horror for over a year, alone, because he was too scared to do anything. The helplessness, the sheer rage that swelled inside me, it was suffocating. I couldn't stand it. Knowing that someone you love has been violated and feeling utterly powerless to fix it makes your stomach twist. Then it fuels a fire you can't put out. I sat with that fire for a day, silent and calculating. I didn't post online, didn't ask anyone for advice. I made a decision on my own. I work in hazardous environments, so I had something most people don't: a full contaminant-blocking suit. No fibers, no fingerprints, no sweat, no trace. Underneath, I wore clothes I would never use again: an old hoodie, worn jeans, and sneakers. I didn't take my car, that would be stupid. Instead, I rode my bike, 12 miles from a wooded area outside of town, avoiding main roads, keeping to trails, making sure I passed no stores, banks, or cameras. No records, no trace. When I reached his house, it was just after sunset, perfect timing for someone to answer the door willingly. When he opened it, I didn't wait. I didn't introduce myself. I didn't let him speak. The instant I saw his face, I slammed him into the doorframe. I felt the sickening crunch of his nose breaking. Blood gushed instantly, some of it hitting me, most pooling on the floor. He barely had time to react before I grabbed the back of his head and slammed him into the door again, harder this time. His forehead split open. He collapsed to the floor like a rag doll, gasping, disoriented, trying to understand what had just happened. I crouched next to his ear and whispered, calm but deadly, "I know everyone in this town's gay community." I let it sink in. Then I stood, turned, and walked out. No words, no hesitation. By the time I reached my bike, my heartbeat was finally slowing. I retraced my path through the woods, careful to let the adrenaline subside. The suit was burned in the bonfire that Friday night. The clothes I wore underneath disposed of. No trace, no evidence, no name. He won't report it. What would he say? I got my face smashed by someone I never saw? The threat still lingers, and the man knows it. That's enough. People might tell me I should feel remorse, shame, guilt, that I should have left it to the law, to the system. But the system failed. Force met force. And the memory of his face hitting that door will haunt him every time he thinks about hurting someone again. Not everyone will understand. Not everyone will agree. But my boyfriend sleeps a little easier now. Justice, in its rawest form, has been served, and I regret nothing.
Sometimes, in the dead of night, I still think about him, about the power of fear, about how close people come to living nightmares that go unnoticed. And I know, in a world where the system fails too often, some people like me exist to make sure predators feel the weight of what they've done. That knowledge is chilling, and it's comforting too.
The events of this story began in the spring of 2019 and concluded in November of the same year. Only recently did it occur to me that this story truly belongs here, a tale that remains, without exaggeration, the strangest and most unsettling interpersonal experience I have ever endured. It unfolded slowly, like a creeping fog, revealing layers of manipulation, deceit, and obsession. From the very beginning, I felt like a detective trying to piece together the identity of a hidden tormentor. And when the truth finally emerged, my mind spun with confusion, betrayal, and the chilling realization that I may have narrowly escaped something far more sinister. It started innocently enough. In 2018, I had a friends with benefits relationship with a man named Judah. He appeared during one of those doomed, let's open our relationship phases, a last-ditch attempt to avoid a breakup. While I enjoyed his presence, there was never a deep emotional connection between us. Eventually, our interactions tapered off amicably, limited to liking each other's Tumblr posts and occasional Snapchats. Months later, Judah reached out for some writing advice. I wanted to be genuinely helpful, so I crafted a few paragraphs of heartfelt feedback. He thanked me, and then our contact dwindled again. Not long after, the first disturbing anonymous messages appeared on my Tumblr. At first, they were mere insults targeting my appearance and my art, which I dismissed as random trolling. But gradually, they escalated, becoming disturbingly specific. The harasser began implying knowledge of my real-life whereabouts, dropping hints about the school I attended, details not publicly available on my blog. My chest tightened with unease. Whoever was behind this must have known me personally, or had gone to extraordinary lengths to track me down. Judah immediately came to mind. Very few people knew my Tumblr URL, and he was the only one for whom I could imagine a motive for jealous harassment. Despite this suspicion, I blocked him on all social media and tried to move on. But the harassment only intensified. The messages turned crueler, mocking my disabilities and threatening physical harm. Religion became a twisted weapon in their hands, as they claimed my ailments were divine punishment. Anxiety shadowed me each time the new message icon appeared, and I eventually disabled anonymous messaging. This, however, only prompted the birth of a new series of accounts, beginning with one ominously named Chaos Bringer. The tone shifted into something occult, sinister, and deeply unnerving. They invoked Lord Satan and spoke of curses and demonic torment. I blocked them, but the harassment persisted under new accounts, each more elaborate than the last. Then came Soul Chaosbringer 2. The messages from this account were pure nightmare fuel. Claims of energetic warfare, demonic ownership, and threats against my soul. They even recommended mystical protections like selenite, as if to mock and control me simultaneously. I blocked them, and another account emerged. It became a relentless game.
a shadowy stalker tormenting me under different guises. After a period of silence, I tentatively turned anonymous messages back on. Within days, the familiar waves of hatred returned. At one point, a message of apparent remorse appeared, only to be followed by renewed harassment. Amidst this chaos, someone approached me who seemed different. Elm, a non-binary person new to my area, shy but friendly. They claimed to have noticed from my photos that we lived near each other. Tentatively, I engaged with them, and our discussions about spirituality and astrology initially seemed harmless. A small test reassured me that Elm was not the harasser. We eventually met up to buy weed, though the encounter was chaotic. A wrong address, a twisted ankle, manic energy, and a brief hangout that ended too soon due to my exhaustion. After that day, the messages dwindled. Elm and I continued occasional chats until suddenly they ended our budding friendship abruptly, citing a lack of common ground. I was taken aback, yet suspicion did not immediately strike me. Then fate intervened. On the very same day, my best friend Monica logged into Tumblr for the first time in over a year. She had also received hateful messages dating back to spring 2019. There was only one mutual acquaintance with access to both of our accounts, Judah. It all clicked. When I confronted Judah, he denied involvement, but inadvertently revealed that his partner had indeed sent one hateful message out of jealousy over our past relationship. My heart sank as I pieced it together. Elm had manipulated and deceived me, gaining my trust to enter my home, all while harboring a deep, violent hatred. The lies, the occult threats, the obsession, it had all originated from them. By the time they finally revealed themselves, 5 months of torment had passed, followed by 3 more months of subtle deception. Suddenly, the harassment stopped. The truth lay bare, and the storm of lies dissolved into silence. Judah and Elm separated, and I never heard from either again. I often wonder how close I came to something far worse. Perhaps I escaped by mere chance that day, when exhaustion cut our hangout short. Elm's facade had concealed darkness too deep to fathom, a danger that I hope I will never encounter again. And for the love of God, stay far away from my anonymous messages.
I've been a dog walker for a small but busy company for years, and while most days are mundane, pick up a dog, walk it, drop it off, some days stick with you in a way you can never forget. One client lives in a picturesque, seemingly peaceful neighborhood, the type of place where every hedge is perfectly trimmed and every street lamp glows warmly in the morning fog. But sometimes the calmness in such neighborhoods is deceptive, hiding things no one wants to see. I go to this client twice a week, usually in the mornings. Like most dog owners, they have a lockbox for the keys. They kept theirs behind a vase next to their apartment door, a spot that seemed harmless enough, ordinary, almost forgettable. That Monday morning, I was already running behind. Parking was a nightmare, as usual, and I was desperate to grab Mia, their Bernoodle puppy, by 9:45 a.m. so I could stay on schedule for the day. My nerves were fraying even before I reached the apartment. I wrapped my hand around the vase to grab the lockbox and found nothing. Panic prickled at the edges of my mind. Sometimes owners forget to put out the lockbox, yes, but something about that morning felt wrong. I checked under mats, around the railings, anywhere it could be hidden. Still nothing. My heart began to race. I texted the owner,
Kay, asking where the lockbox might be. Normally, she's so busy she doesn't respond immediately, but I had no choice. Minutes dragged by. I tried to reason with myself, telling myself it was probably nothing, but the unease was growing like a shadow creeping across the walls. I knocked. Nothing. Knocked again. Still silence. Finally, I heard shuffling upstairs. A hesitant, dragging sound. Someone was moving toward the stairs. The door creaked open. It wasn't Kay, nor her husband. A man stood there, draped in a thin white towel that barely stayed on his hips. He held Mia in his arms, her tiny paws twitching nervously, and his wide eyes locked on mine. A shiver ran down my spine, a cold realization settling in. This man was not supposed to be there. "Hey, I'm here to take Mia for her walk," I managed, forcing my voice to remain calm despite the panic bubbling beneath the surface. He set Mia down, handed me the leash, and passed me the lockbox without a word, mumbling something I didn't catch. I walked out of the apartment with Mia in tow, my mind spinning. What had I just stumbled upon? During our walk, my manager called. Apparently, Kay had received a strange message that morning. A man had come by, claiming to be a new dog walker and asking for their lockbox code. Her husband, rushing out the door, had given it to him without a second thought, but no new walker had been arranged. I told my manager about the man in the towel. Police were called immediately. I was told in no uncertain terms never to enter that apartment again. Kay's husband arrived shortly after, furious at himself for handing over the code, but relieved that nothing was missing. As I continued walking Mia down the busy main street, I saw him again. Across the road, that same man, holding a beer, grinning unnervingly, called out, "Hi, doggy! Hi, doggy!" before sprinting away. My stomach churned. He knew where they lived. He knew their routines. He had been watching, studying. Once Kay and her husband reached the apartment, we inspected everything. The place was untouched. Nothing was missing. The only evidence of his presence was the dirty water in the shower, the faint, lingering scent that made my skin crawl. The experience left me shaken. The intrusion, the violation, the creeping fear. It's terrifying to realize how easily a seemingly innocent morning could have turned catastrophic. All he wanted was a shower that day, but tomorrow, who knows what he might want? Even now, I can't walk past a vase without imagining someone watching, lurking in the shadows. Every familiar street corner feels a little too quiet, every neighbor a little too alert. And I keep asking myself, how many people like him are out there, silently observing, waiting for the perfect moment? The calm streets of that neighborhood hide more than just quiet. They hide strangers with invisible eyes, strangers who know more than they should, who know exactly how to strike without warning. And that thought alone keeps me alert every time I reach for a vase, every time I let Mia out, every time I step out of my door. Because sometimes the most mundane routine can expose you to the darkest truths about human nature.
A few years back, my brother-in-law bought another apartment complex in Florida. He already owned several in West Palm Beach and Miami. When he asked me to manage this new property, I thought it sounded like an easy gig.
I had just graduated from college and was planning to pursue my master's, so it seemed like the perfect way to keep busy. He booked my flight to Orlando, and I was ecstatic. I loved Disney and was already imagining a year-long pass, exploring all the parks, maybe even enjoying some of the nightlife. But as soon as we drove out of Orlando, that excitement began to fade. The property wasn't in Orlando at all. It was in a tiny, obscure town called Lakeburg. The best way I can describe it, if a biker town and a retirement community had a child, it would look just like this. Quiet, slow-paced, unsettlingly still, nothing like what I'd imagined. Still, I settled in. The complex was small, only 11 units, including my own one-bedroom tucked in the corner. Most residents were retirees, snowbirds, a couple of military families, chill, quiet people. But then there was Andy. Andy was massive. I'm a big guy, 6'4" and 250 pounds, but Andy made me feel like a child. He had to be at least 6'6" and over 400 pounds. He walked with a cane, kept his long black hair in a ponytail, and claimed to work from home, though rumors said he was on disability after a work accident. Honestly, I didn't care much. He paid rent on time and kept mostly to himself. His apartment was immaculate, too. I'd only entered once to fix his AC. There wasn't a beer can or pizza box in sight. Things stayed calm for nearly a year. Then, one night in November, the rain came down in sheets, typical Florida weather. Around midnight, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Joe, one of the retirees. Normally cheerful, he looked pale and tense. "Sorry to bother you, Sam," he whispered, "but something's not right with Andy." I threw on a jacket and followed him to Andy's apartment. Joe pressed a finger to his lips and motioned me to listen. I pressed my ear to the door. Inside, Andy was yelling. Not a normal argument, full-blown screaming, crashing, shattering sounds. But Andy never had visitors, not once in the year I'd been there. I knocked. Heavy footsteps approached, and Andy opened the door. He looked off. Normally neat and clean, now his shirt was stained, his hair greasy, and the smell hit me instantly, foul, overwhelming. Glancing inside, the apartment was a disaster zone. Trash, overturned furniture, stained carpet. "Everything okay?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. He grunted and slammed the door. I told Joe to keep me posted, then went back to my unit. The next morning, I checked again. No response. I forgot as the day went on. By December, rent collection began. Andy's check never arrived. Concerned, I went to his apartment. Still nothing. Later that day, the moaning started. Low, pained, chilling. I know I should have called the police immediately. I didn't. Curiosity took hold. I used my master key. The stench hit like a physical blow. Vomit, urine, feces, rotting human odor. The walls were streaked. The apartment worse than I imagined. I called Andy's name, then 911. The moaning came from the back room. My heart hammered, but I couldn't stop. What I saw still haunts me. Andy lay naked, slumped on the floor, covered in filthy clothes and his own waste. Puke had soaked the carpet. Worse, his body was covered in bites. Not fleas, human bites. His arms and legs raw, some wounds infected. And the injuries inflicted on himself, even from his back end. I thought someone had attacked him, but days later, the horrifying truth came out. Rushed to ICU, Andy's sister, his medical guardian, explained he suffered from severe mental disorders. He'd stopped taking his medication weeks prior. There was no intruder. He'd argued with himself. The bites, the bleeding, it was self-inflicted. A complete mental breakdown of the most violent kind. He survived, barely, moved in with his sister to recover, leaving me to clean his apartment. While packing and cleaning, I found a shoebox in his room. Magazine clippings, old family photos, pictures of other tenants, including me. Every eye burned out with cigarettes, some mouths marked with X's. My stomach turned. Was this part of his illness or something far darker? Had Andy always been like this, hiding behind rent checks and quiet routines? I'll never know. I never spoke to him again after his recovery. I hope he's on his medications and safe. But I pray he never returns to this complex, especially not for that shoebox. Because some doors, once opened, can never be closed.
This happened to me when I was only 11 years old, living in a modest, lower middle-class neighborhood in Arnold, Missouri. Back then, I didn't truly understand how dangerous the world could be. It was the early 90s, and I was naive, sheltered, and perhaps far too trusting for my own good. I had placed small posters around the neighborhood, offering babysitting services, complete with my phone number, thinking it was just an innocent way to earn a little extra money. I had no idea that those tiny sheets of paper could serve as invitations for something terrifying. At first, the calls were quiet and polite. A man identified himself only as Doctor. No full name, no credentials, just Doctor. He started with seemingly harmless questions, things about basic health, but soon his inquiries grew personal, probing, and inappropriate. He asked if I had reached puberty, if I had started my period. Then, shockingly, he began asking about my older sisters. Each call left me uneasy, a subtle knot of fear tightening in my stomach that I couldn't shake. As time went on, his requests grew more explicit and disturbing. He instructed me to do things over the phone that I instinctively knew were wrong. He made it clear that I could never tell anyone. For a child, these instructions were bewildering, frightening, and suffocating. I began lying to him, pretending I had done what he asked, but he somehow sensed my deception and grew increasingly frustrated. Every call left me with a lingering fear, a heavy dread that something terrible could happen if I didn't comply. One day, my older sister was nearby while I was on the phone. Desperate for someone to understand what I was enduring, I begged her to take the receiver. She hesitated at first, but finally she agreed. The moment she picked it up, the line went dead. I felt a fleeting sense of relief, but I knew deep down that the danger was far from over. About a week later, the threat became frighteningly real. I was walking alone down my street, a routine I had developed to pass the long, quiet hours in our small town. The afternoon was cool and gray, and the shadows of the trees stretched long across the cracked sidewalks. I noticed a car moving slowly behind me, a dark, old, battered vehicle. My stomach clenched. I didn't want to look too closely, not wanting to provoke whatever was following me. Yet the car maintained my pace, staying just about 10 feet behind, never overtaking me. Panic surged through me. My legs moved faster, my heart pounded violently in my chest. I could feel the presence of the driver behind me, and the thought that he might reach out and grab me made each step feel unbearably heavy.
I broke into a jog, then a run, desperate to reach the safety of my home. My breath came in ragged gasps, my chest tight with fear. I flung open the front door and glanced back, just in time to see the car swerve into a neighbor's driveway before speeding away. After that, the calls stopped, the following stopped, yet the terror lingered. Even as a child, I realized how close I had been to becoming a victim in a story from which there might have been no escape. I was just a child. No matter how hard I tried, I could never have overpowered a full-grown man. Luck, fate, or some unseen force had spared me. Looking back at news from that time, I learned that several young girls in and around Arnold had gone missing or were found murdered. Many of these cases remain unsolved. Authorities could never determine if it was a single person or multiple predators. But I cannot shake the thought that I might have been another target, another statistic, if even the smallest circumstances had been different. I never told my parents, never confided in anyone. But even now, decades later, I feel that same creeping dread in my chest when I remember those calls, the slow-moving car trailing me, the looming shadow of danger that hovered over my small life. The world is full of hidden predators, and as a child, you never know which simple action, like putting up a babysitting poster, might attract someone with terrible intentions. I was fortunate, more than fortunate. I was spared. And yet the memory remains, a dark reminder that innocence can shatter in an instant, and that sometimes survival is nothing short of a miracle.
Some stories stay with you forever, whether you want them to or not. They bury themselves in the corners of your mind, resurfacing in the quiet moments, reminding you how close you came to losing everything. This is one of those stories. It takes me back more than 30 years to when I was in my early 20s. Back then, I worked as a burlesque entertainer in a gentleman's club. It wasn't glamorous the way outsiders might imagine. It was smoky, dimly lit, filled with the smell of cheap cologne, sweat, and stale alcohol. Nights blurred together. Strange men came and went, but every now and then someone would stand out. That night, I noticed a couple, a man and a woman. They weren't loud, they didn't draw attention, but something about the way they watched made me remember them. Still, it wasn't unusual for couples to come in, so I thought little of it. A few days later, the doorman handed me a folded piece of paper. 2 names, 2 numbers, Laura and Richard. He said they wanted me to call. I dialed Laura's number. She sounded polite, warm even. She said she and her partner Richard had been at the club and thought I'd be perfect for a role in a movie Richard was producing. She spoke with the kind of confidence that made everything sound believable. "You have a presence," she told me, "a kind of spark. We just know you'd be perfect." I was 22, hungry for something bigger than myself. To hear the word movie was intoxicating. So when she asked if I'd be open to a meeting, I didn't hesitate. Of course I said yes. The next evening at 7, Richard pulled up in his Jeep. I had dressed carefully, white lace with ostrich feather trim, something that would make me look like I belonged on a screen. He smiled, introduced himself smoothly, and I climbed in. He suggested we stop by his place first so he could grab some contracts. That was the first red flag. But at the time, I brushed it off. Why would I suspect anything?
I wanted to believe this was my big break. When we got to his house, he left me sitting in the car, disappearing inside. Minutes passed. The street was quiet, the house dark, except for one window glowing faintly upstairs. Finally, he came back out, manila folders tucked under his arm, and an open bottle of beer in his hand. "This is for you," he said casually, handing it toward me. The label glistened in the light. My throat went dry. Something in my gut told me not to take it. I laughed nervously and set it down in the Jeep's window well, saying something about not drinking in cars. He didn't press, just smiled. But that smile, it didn't look right. We drove to a bar I knew. Inside, he ordered drinks and laid out scripts and contracts. They looked official enough. He talked about actors I could meet, sets I could visit. He made it all sound real. Too real. But there was a strange undercurrent in his charm. It was too polished, too rehearsed, like lines from a role he'd played many times before. At one point, I excused myself to call my boyfriend from the payphone in the back. I carried my drink with me, because the older girls at the club had drilled it into me: never leave your glass unattended. When I came back and told Richard I had to leave, his face changed. The warmth slipped. His eyes narrowed, and he leaned forward, almost pleading. "You're making a mistake. You could meet Mickey Rourke tonight. You could come see the set. Do you understand the opportunity you're walking away from?" I forced a smile, thanked him, and stood firm. Finally, he handed me his card. I walked away that night, never calling again. I thought that was the end of it. Months later, the police showed up at the club. They weren't there for a drink. They carried 2 thick binders of mugshots and a stack of Polaroids. The air shifted instantly. We all knew something terrible was coming. They told us about a predator couple, people who posed as producers, promising dancers roles in films before drugging and assaulting them. When they slid the mugshot books across the bar, my hands trembled as I flipped through the pages. And then I froze. Richard and Laura, clear as day. Then came the Polaroids. The images were like a punch to the gut. Women sprawled out, drugged and lifeless, their eyes half open but empty. Richard's face appeared in some of them, Laura's in others. They looked almost proud, as if the photographs were trophies. My heart sank when I recognized a few of the women, friends, dancers I had laughed with, shared dressing rooms with, women who never showed up to work again, who I had thought had simply moved on. Now I knew the truth. There were many more I didn't recognize, far too many. Richard was arrested and convicted. Laura, shielded by her family's wealth, cut a deal and testified against him. She walked free. For years, I tried to forget. I tried to bury it. But then, 12 years after his conviction, I saw his name in the paper. Richard was up for parole. My blood went cold. I sat down and wrote a letter to the parole board detailing every detail of my encounter. I begged them not to let him out, because I knew the truth. Men like him don't change. They wait, they watch, and they strike again. Sometimes, late at night, I think back to that Jeep, to the open beer he placed in my hand. If I had taken one sip, I wouldn't have made it to the bar. I would have been another nameless girl in a stack of Polaroids, my body captured in those grotesque, frozen moments. I was lucky, too lucky. So I tell this story as a warning. Watch your drinks. Listen to your instincts. Because evil doesn't always come snarling with fangs. Sometimes it comes smiling, dressed as opportunity, carrying contracts and promising fame. And sometimes it's sitting right across the table from you. Crimes have a way of leaving shadows in our memory. Shadows that grow darker the more we try to forget them. Before I tell you what happened, let me set the stage. This was about 10 years ago. At the time, I was a young gay man living in a mid-sized city, restless and searching for connection in a dating scene that felt more like a trap than a chance for love. Most people like me relied on apps and websites. They were our secret underworld, hidden promises, fleeting encounters, and behind every profile, the question of whether the person on the other side was real, safe, or dangerous. I checked them daily, sometimes out of boredom, sometimes out of loneliness, but I rarely actually met anyone. Something always stopped me. The fear of disease, of theft, of waking up to a nightmare instead of a fantasy. But then came the ad on Craigslist. Just a short, simple post from a man slightly older than me. He wanted exactly what I wanted. A casual night with someone his age. Maybe drinks, cuddling, and whatever else might follow. It felt harmless, even normal, almost inviting. We exchanged texts for a month. Harmless, playful, warm. Not once did I sense danger. Finally, I asked if he wanted to meet. He agreed without hesitation. His place was about 10 miles out of the city, quiet, isolated, far from the safety of familiar streets. That night, as I drove, the sun sank lower until the world was painted in shadows. At 6 p.m., the roads already felt empty, swallowed by the dusk. He texted me that he was walking home from a friend's house and asked me to pick him up. I spotted him on the side of the road. He carried a massive speaker, his hood pulled tight around his face despite the warm weather. Something about that image unsettled me. The road was desolate, dusty, nearly dirt, with scattered trailers here and there like broken teeth in the earth. I pulled over. "Hey, stranger, need a ride?" I said, trying to lighten the moment. He didn't laugh, didn't smile, just opened the door and climbed in silently. That was the first shiver down my spine. After a month of chatting, I expected warmth, a smile, at least recognition. Instead, there was nothing, just silence. On the way, he suddenly asked me to turn around, saying he wanted to grab alcohol and a blunt. It didn't strike me as strange at first, so I agreed. But as we drove back down that endless dirt road, he casually mentioned his power was out. Something in me froze. No lights, no electricity? He said it as if it didn't matter. I forced a chuckle, asking if he at least had candles. He gave no response. He stared straight ahead, as if I hadn't spoken at all. And then the lie slipped. Earlier, he had told me his kids lived with him, that their mother wasn't in the picture. Now he said they were staying with his mom. Small details, but they cut through my mind like knives. At the store, he pulled his hood tighter, moving quickly like a man hiding from someone or hiding something. Back in the car, he admitted out of nowhere that he had been selling crack to get money for the night. My chest tightened. Why tell me that? What else was he hiding? By the time we left the second store, I wanted nothing more than to escape. When he stepped out, I considered driving off, leaving him behind. But his massive speaker sat in my car like an anchor. If I left with it, he could accuse me of theft. I tried to drag it out of my car. That's when I heard his voice, right behind me. "What are you doing?" The words sliced through me. I spun around, caught like a thief, my blood running cold. Somehow I fumbled a lie, saying I just wanted to move it to the back seat. To my disbelief, he bought it. But my chance at escape was gone. Back in the car, he grew quieter, fidgeting in his pockets, eyes fixed forward. The road around us stretched into darkness. No trailers, no signs of life, just blackness beyond the headlights. I asked when we'd reach his place. He said the address he gave me wasn't real. It was an old business. His actual house didn't show up on Google Maps. That was it. The alarms in my head were deafening. I told him my best friend was waiting for me back in the city, that she knew where I was and expected me soon. I made sure he believed I had already shared his address with her. He was irritated, restless, almost twitching. Then he turned to me with a chilling suggestion. "Can't we just have a little car fun out here? Nobody lives out here. Nobody will see us." The way he said it, flat, pressing, almost hungry, made my skin crawl. I told him no. My friend was waiting. My friend had already called. I wasn't staying. He huffed, slammed the door when he finally got out, and as he leaned down to say something through the window, I slammed my foot on the gas, tires spitting dirt and smoke. I didn't look back. My hands were shaking on the wheel. My chest was tight. I called everyone I loved, my mom, my sister, my friends, just to hear their voices. I could have been a headline, a missing person, a nameless body in the woods. Later, at home, I searched the address he gave me. 2 miles down, at the end of that dead road, was a single house. Abandoned, windows boarded, doors gone, for sale for years. My friend said what I already knew in my gut. He wanted to get me there, alone, trapped, forgotten. That night carved a promise into me. Never again, never Craigslist, never the dark roads outside the city. Because some people don't want to meet you. They want to own you, to silence you, to leave you where no one will ever find you. And sometimes the scariest part is knowing you almost let them.
Some stories don't fade with time. They attach themselves to you, coil around your memory, and wait in the dark corners of your mind. This one technically isn't mine. It belongs to my mother. But I was there too. I was only 4 months old, too young to form memories. And yet, because of how many times she's told it, because of the way her voice still trembles when she gets to certain parts, I can see it all in my head, as if I had been awake and aware that night. It was 1994. My parents were barely scraping by, trying to hold their lives together under the crushing weight of bills and endless work. My father often came home late, exhausted from long shifts. My mother spent her days alone with me in a small, drafty house that seemed to echo with silence when the sun went down. That particular Wednesday had been like any other. My mom went through the routine of caring for me, feeding, changing, rocking me back and forth until her arms ached. By evening, she was running on fumes.
The laundry still needed to be brought in from the outside line, the kitchen was a mess, and I was fussy. She was worn out, longing for the moment my dad would finally come home so she could close her eyes and breathe. But instead of my father's keys jingling in the lock, there came a knock at the door. It was 9 p.m., a believable time for my dad to be arriving late from work. My mom barely thought twice. She placed me in the bassinet in the living room and went to the door, too drained to even glance through the window. She unlocked it, pulled it open, and froze. The man standing there was not my father. He was a stranger, about 5'9" or 5'10", slender, with dark hair and darker eyes. His clothes weren't filthy, but they looked worn, wrinkled, like he'd slept in them. He gave a faint smile, thin, awkward, and said in a calm, practiced voice, "Hey, my car broke down just up the road. Do you mind if I use your phone?" On the surface, the request was harmless, but something in his tone wasn't right. My mother would later say it was too smooth, too casual, as though he'd rehearsed the line again and again. Something about him made her stomach twist, but she was caught off guard, running on exhaustion, and out of reflex, she stepped back, gesturing to the hallway phone just inside. "Yeah, sure, the phone's right there." But instead of stopping at the phone, the man stepped into the house, past the phone, past the table, deeper, closer to my mother. That's when the dread truly hit her. He wasn't looking for a phone, he was looking at her. She forced herself to sound calm, pointing to the phone again, trying to keep her voice steady. "You can use it here." The man tilted his head to the side, watching her. His faint smile warped into something darker, something predatory. So she lied. "My husband is in the shower. He'll be out any minute." Silence stretched. His eyes studied her. Then he spoke again, voice flat, certain. "I don't hear a shower running. I think you're home alone." The air went ice cold. Her chest tightened, her blood roared in her ears. She thought of me, lying helpless in the bassinet just feet away. Her mind raced. Grab the baby, run to the bathroom, lock the door, throw me out the window if she had to, and scream for help. But no, the night outside was still, empty. Who would come? Who would hear? And then something shifted. A growl, low, guttural, rolling out of the kitchen like thunder. It made the walls seem to tremble. From the shadows stepped Pride, our 2-year-old Doberman. She was massive to my mother in that moment, a wall of muscle and teeth. Her body was rigid, ears flat, eyes burning with a focus my mother had never seen before. She wasn't barking. She wasn't moving. She was waiting. The man froze. The mask of confidence slipped from his face. My mother's voice was no longer trembling when she spoke again. "You need to leave, now." Her hand moved closer to Pride's back, a silent signal. The stranger's eyes flicked to the dog, to the teeth glistening in the dim light. His smirk was gone. Step by step, he backed toward the door. And then, without a word, he was gone. The door closed. My mother locked it, her hands shaking violently, and collapsed against the wall, tears flooding her eyes. Her heart felt like it was breaking through her chest. She rushed to me, scooped me into her arms, and held me so tightly that I squirmed against her grip. She whispered over and over,
half to me, half to herself. "You're safe, you're safe, you're safe." When my father came home 20 minutes later, she was still trembling. He searched the yard, the street, even walked down the road looking for a broken-down car. There was nothing. The road was empty, silent. There had never been a car. There had never been a stranger in need of help. Just a predator. One who had chosen his house carefully. One who had almost succeeded. The police were called, but there was no trace of him. No one matching the description was ever found. My mother never saw him again. But that didn't mean the fear left. For years, she checked the locks again and again before bed. Sometimes 3 times, sometimes 4. Pride was never allowed to sleep anywhere except right beside my parents. Because my mom knew. She knew how close it had come. Pride lived to be 13 years old. She had the warmest bed, the best food, endless love and attention. She was treated like royalty every single day of her life. Because my mother never forgot. She never forgot that when she was vulnerable, when she was paralyzed with fear, it wasn't chance or luck, it was pride. Even now, decades later, when the house creaks late at night and the wind pushes against the windows, I sometimes imagine what would have happened if pride hadn't been there, what that stranger might have done. And it chills me to the bone.
It happened only a few days ago, and even now my hands still shake when I think about it. I wasn't planning to post this, but the memory keeps replaying in my head like a broken record, each time darker than before. What began as an ordinary afternoon, meeting a couple of friends for coffee, turned into the kind of nightmare you don't easily forget. It was Friday afternoon when Sarah called me. Her voice was casual, lighthearted. She wanted me to meet her and Lisa at Dunkin' Donuts, just to catch up. I remember glancing out the window at the clear blue sky, thinking it was too perfect a day to stay inside. The walk would do me good. The air was crisp, sunlight warm on my face, and I actually felt safe. Little did I know how fast that feeling would evaporate. When I entered Dunkin', the smell of coffee and fresh pastries hit me instantly. People were scattered around, families, teenagers, a few solitary laptop workers. It was busy, but not overly loud. I spotted Sarah and Lisa waving me over, and I joined them, relieved to see familiar faces. For a while, everything was normal. But then I noticed her. In the far corner, half hidden in the shadows, my younger sister Elena was sitting with her friend Jess. At first, I felt a flicker of surprise. What were the odds of us running into each other here? I got up, smiling, and made my way over. But the moment I greeted them, their faces shifted. They weren't smiling. They were pale, tense, almost frozen. Elena leaned in, her voice so quiet I barely heard it. "Don't look now, but the guy in the blue shirt, I think he's been following us." I tilted my head slightly, pretending to stretch my neck, and that's when I saw him. A man in his mid-40s, salt and pepper hair, sitting at a table not far from theirs. He wasn't eating, wasn't drinking, just sitting, eyes flicking toward Elena and Jess whenever he thought no one was watching. Elena continued, whispering fast. "He's walked past us at least 5 times in the last 20 minutes, always slowing down, like staring." At first, I wanted to brush it off. Maybe he was just some weird guy. But then, as if on cue, the man stood, made his way toward the bathroom,
And when he passed Elena's table, his pace slowed to a crawl, almost unnaturally slow, as though dragging the moment out, savoring it. His head tilted just enough that I saw his eyes slide toward my sister. It wasn't paranoia. It was deliberate. I nodded to Elena and Jess, letting them know I'd seen it too. Their relief was brief but fragile. I returned to Sarah and Lisa, explained quietly what was happening. They laughed nervously, brushing it off. He's probably harmless. But then, as if the air in the room had shifted, another man walked in and joined the first. This one younger, early 30s, dressed in dark clothes. He sat across from the blue shirt man, and the two exchanged a look. Then they both turned their gaze toward Elena and Jess. That's when my stomach dropped. Two men, watching, whispering, pointing. We decided to leave. I told Elena and Jess to act natural, not to run. Sarah and Lisa stayed behind, still unconvinced anything serious was going on. Elena offered to drive me home, and I agreed. The moment we stepped outside, the sunlight no longer felt warm. It felt thin, distant, like the day itself had soured. The drive was short, barely 2 minutes, but I'll never forget the way Elena's hands shook slightly on the wheel. When we pulled up to my place, I remembered I had something to return to my parents. Since Elena was heading there anyway, I dashed inside to grab it. That's when her phone rang. "Don't look out the window." Elena's voice cracked through the speaker. "But he followed us. He's outside." My chest tightened. I turned slowly, pulling the curtain back just a fraction. My blood froze. A car was parked in my neighbor's driveway, a car that didn't belong to them. And behind the wheel was the man from Duncan. I yanked open the door and waved Elena and Jess inside. I slammed it shut, locked it, double-checked it. My heart was hammering so loudly I could barely think. "Jess, call 911 now." "Elena, take pictures, license plate, everything." For a brief moment, I felt like we had control again. Jess was on the phone with the dispatcher, relaying details, her voice trembling but steady enough to get the story across. Elena snapped photos, her hands shaking. Then came the knock. It wasn't just a knock. It was a thunderous pounding, rattling the frame of the door. Then a voice, deep and commanding. "Police, open up." Jess gasped, whispering, "They're here already." She told the dispatcher, "The police are at the door now," and hung up. Relief swept the room like a wave, until instinct made me pause. My hand hovered over the lock, but something inside me screamed, "Look first." I pressed my eye against the peephole, and what I saw made my blood turn to ice. It wasn't a police officer. It was him. His face was twisted, stretched into a grotesque imitation of authority. His knuckles slammed against the door as he barked, "We had a call, sir. Let us in." I froze, my throat dry. Somehow, words forced themselves out of my mouth. We didn't call the police. Behind me, Elena and Jess looked at me in confusion. They didn't understand. Not yet. The pounding grew louder. His voice shifted, no longer commanding, but desperate. First ordering, then pleading. "Sir, please, let me in. Let me in now." I backed away from the door, heart racing. Then, through the tension, the faint sound of sirens. Real sirens. Red and blue lights flashed through the curtains, and moments later, the real police arrived. The man didn't resist. He was taken into custody quietly, almost too quietly, as though this wasn't his first time. When they searched him, the truth was worse than I had imagined. A kitchen knife was hidden on his body. More weapons were found in his car. If I had opened that door without checking, if I had trusted that voice, I don't think any of us would have made it out. That night, my parents and Jess's parents came over. We sat in silence, replaying every sound, every glance, every pounding fist on the door. My sister tried to act calm, but her eyes betrayed her. Wide, unblinking, haunted. Even now, days later, when I close my eyes at night, I hear it again. That knock, that voice pretending to be something it wasn't. And I can't shake the thought, what if he hadn't been caught? What if there are others like him, waiting, watching, patient enough to follow you home? Some nightmares don't wait for you to fall asleep. They come in broad daylight. They knock at your door. And sometimes they almost get in.
This happened when I was a bartender about 6 years ago. For the record, I'm female, and I was 26 at the time. Even now, I think about this often, sometimes when I'm in a grocery store, sometimes when I'm just walking to my car at night. It's changed me. I no longer go shopping alone after midnight, ever. And once you hear this, you'll understand why. It was a busy Friday night at the bar. The place was loud with laughter, glasses clinking, the faint smell of alcohol mixed with sweat and perfume. The dinner rush had finally died down when the manager noticed we were running low on essentials, lemons, limes, bitters. He asked me to run to the 24-hour grocery store just down the road. Normally, it was no big deal. I'd done it plenty of times before. I grabbed what I needed quickly. The store was fairly empty, fluorescent lights buzzing above, the faint echo of music on the intercom. Everything felt routine until I turned down the liquor aisle. That's when I saw them. 2 men. Country-looking, rough around the edges, about my age. They weren't shopping, they were just standing there, staring at me, whispering to each other. I could feel their eyes crawling over me, sticking to my skin like oil. My instincts screamed at me to leave. So I grabbed the bottle I needed and power-walked away, forcing myself not to run. I made it to self-checkout, relief fluttering in my chest, until I realized they had followed me. They weren't browsing anymore. They were right there. One was tall, broad-shouldered, with a hard face, and eyes so bloodshot I couldn't tell if it was drugs, alcohol, or both. The other was shorter, heavier, and dirtier looking, his gaze meaner, hungrier. They didn't just invade my space, they hovered so close I could smell them. Sweat, beer, something rotten underneath. I tried to stay calm, forced a polite half-smile, hoping they'd take the hint and back off. Instead, it was an invitation. "Looks like you're ready to party, huh?" the taller one said, grinning with broken teeth. "Something like that," I muttered. "Not for me, though." That should have been the end of it, but it wasn't. They stepped closer. "Must be for your boyfriend, then." Another tight smile. I turned slightly, shielding my purse from their view. My heart hammered as I reached inside, fingers brushing against the small pocket knife I always carried. I slipped it discreetly into my sleeve, keeping my face neutral, pretending I was just fumbling for my wallet. The tall one leaned in, his voice dropping lower, darker. "Oh, I see how it is. You only go for doctors, rich guys, men who think they're better than us. You think you're too good for us. We can show you different. We can teach you a lesson." The way he said it,
like he was savoring the words, made my skin crawl. I didn't answer. I focused on scanning my items, praying they'd lose interest. But then, the machine malfunctioned. A loud, sharp beep pierced the air, shattering the tense silence. For once in my life, I was grateful for broken technology. The self-checkout attendant immediately came over. She was tall, strong-looking, with a no-nonsense expression. She caught the way the men instantly changed their demeanor, faces shifting from predatory to fake-friendly. "She must have been stealing," one of them joked. "Yeah, we know her. She's good people," the other added, voice dripping with false charm. The attendant didn't buy it, not for a second. She shot them a glare so sharp it could cut glass. Then she looked at me, her eyes locking onto mine, wide, knowing. She'd seen the fear. "This machine isn't working correctly," she said firmly, her hand lightly pressing against my back. "Why don't you come with me, and I'll ring you up at a regular register?" I almost broke down in relief. We walked together to a register near the security office. The men lingered by self-checkout, still watching, still waiting. Minutes passed. They finally left the store, but the worker insisted we wait. She had a feeling, and she was right. When she and the security guard escorted out, the parking lot was eerily empty, lit by harsh white lamps buzzing above. My car sat halfway down the row, and at the very back of the lot, a truck idled, engine rumbling, headlights glaring straight at us. They'd moved it, parked it facing the doors, watching. It was like two predators waiting for their prey to step into the open. I froze, but the worker squeezed my shoulder. The three of us stared back at the truck, making it clear I wasn't alone. Only then did the driver rev the engine and peel out, tires screeching against asphalt, a cloud of smoke in their wake. They were angry, frustrated, denied, but they were gone. My knees nearly gave out from the adrenaline rush. I turned to the worker and the guard, thanking them over and over. I truly believed they had just saved my life, or, at the very least, spared me from something I'd never forget. Later, I wrote a long letter to corporate and the store manager, praising that woman. She didn't know me, didn't owe me anything, but she chose to protect me, and that choice may have saved me from disappearing into the night. Just another unsolved case. It's been years, but I never forgot that truck, the way it sat there, lights on, waiting for me. I never forgot their voices, or the way their smiles twisted when they said they wanted to teach me a lesson. And that's why, to this day, I will never, ever go shopping alone after midnight. Because monsters don't just hide under your bed. Sometimes they wait for you in a parking lot.
It was deep into the night, a darkness so thick it felt alive, pressing down on the world like a weight. Every shadow seemed to shift just beyond the corner of my eyes, as though the trees themselves were watching. I was driving on a long, isolated stretch of road, 5 hours away from work, the asphalt stretching endlessly before me. Only the low hum of my engine accompanied me, a faint heartbeat in the void. The scent of damp pine and cold earth seeped through my open vent, mingling with the faint metallic tang of exhaustion that clung to me. After about 3 hours, fatigue began to crawl into my bones. My eyelids were heavy, drooping against my will. The monotony of the road, the endless darkness, the whispering wind through the pines, all of it felt like it was conspiring to pull me under.
I forced myself to pull into a dimly lit gas station, the harsh yellow light cutting into the night. The smell of gasoline stung my nose, mingling with the scent of old rubber and asphalt. I grabbed a bitter coffee and some snacks, hoping they could stave off the creeping heaviness. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't be enough. The road called me back, and I pressed onward. Within minutes, my eyelids grew heavy again. The forest pressed in from all sides, the trees towering like silent, watchful sentinels. The road seemed abandoned, an empty ribbon cutting through a living nightmare. No other vehicles, no streetlights, just the faint glow of distant signs and the occasional startling thud of bugs against my windshield. I turned up the music, blasted the air conditioning, anything to jolt myself awake. But it was useless. Sleep was creeping in, relentless and cunning. My head nodded forward, almost brushing the steering wheel. Panic slammed into me. I had to stop. I had to find safety. I scanned the roadside desperately for a safe spot, any pocket of land where I could pull over. Mile after mile passed, the pines looming like silent sentinels, until I spotted a small, warm pull-off, a hollow in the road that might once have been used by travelers long forgotten. I didn't care if it was official. I pulled in, killed the engine, and cracked the window just enough to listen. Silence. Total silence. The wind whispered through the branches, the only movement in the vast darkness. I convinced myself it was safe. Nobody would come. If someone did, it would be a cop. Still, I locked the doors, reclined the seat fully, removed my shoes, and closed my eyes, allowing exhaustion to finally claim me. I don't know how long I slept, but it ended abruptly. A blinding light pierced my eyelids, sharp and unnatural, like a predator's gaze cutting into me. My first instinct was confusion. A flashlight, perhaps, someone checking on me. But as my vision adjusted, I realized the horror. It was high beams, blazing from a car parked directly behind me. Then I saw him. A man moving slowly, deliberately toward my vehicle. My heart surged. My half-asleep mind clung to hope. Maybe a police officer, maybe just someone lost. But as he reached the driver's side back door and yanked the handle, hope shattered. He wasn't knocking, he wasn't asking, he was breaking in. Trapped, reclined in the seat, my feet too far from the pedals, I felt my vulnerability tighten like a vice around my chest. Panic surged. My hand slammed down on the horn, a deafening blast that shattered the still night. He recoiled, giving me the fraction of a second I needed. I scrambled upright, fumbling for the keys, twisting my body in ways that made every muscle scream. The engine roared to life, tires screaming against asphalt. Dust, gravel, and smoke erupted behind me as I sped onto the road. Adrenaline coursed through me, sharp and hot. I dared a glance into the rearview mirror and froze. He wasn't alone. Two more figures emerged from the shadows, stepping into his headlights. One carried something long and heavy, a weapon I couldn't identify, but knew was dangerous. A wrench, a crowbar, a bat. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to escape. They had been lying in wait. They had planned this. I was their target, and I had been lucky. For the next 30 minutes, I drove like a man possessed. No speed limit mattered. My hands gripped the wheel until my knuckles whitened, every sense honed to terror. Finally, I reached a distant gas station, my body shaking uncontrollably as I readjusted my seat and slid my shoes back on. The clock in my car revealed a horrifying truth. I had only slept 10 minutes. 10 minutes was all it took for them to find me, surround me, and try to break in. Sleep was no longer an option. I drove to work wide awake, not stopping until I reached the fenced, alarmed facility. My boss merely nodded when I told him, as though he had heard the story countless times before. In this country, we call these criminals road pirates. They target drivers in isolated areas, forcing them from their cars to steal everything: their phones, wallets, valuables, even the vehicles themselves. That stretch of road, a prime hunting ground. Could it have been a coincidence? Maybe. But then why the stealth? Why the weapon in hand? I don't believe in coincidences. That night, I had been lucky. Next time, luck may not be enough. The shadows on the road are patient. The darkness is alive. And the road pirates are always waiting. Be vigilant. Stay alert. Because you never know who or what might be watching.
When I was about 12, my great-uncle John came from Ukraine to visit us in Canada. He had a lifetime of stories, but one in particular always sent chills down my spine. It happened in the late 1960s. John was traveling by train from his village to visit relatives in another town. At one point, he had to change trains and found himself dropped off at a small, isolated station in the middle of nowhere. The platform was nothing more than a weathered wooden hut, surrounded by endless dark forest. A dirt road disappeared into the shadows, twisting between trees like a hidden serpent. The wind whistled through the bare branches, carrying an icy bite that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. Not a soul was in sight. The station felt abandoned, as if the world itself had forgotten this place. Hours passed. The sun had long disappeared, leaving only a dense, oppressive twilight. Cold seeped into John's bones, and worry gnawed at his mind. Where would he sleep? What would he eat? That's when a figure emerged from the shadows. A small, hunched old woman, appearing almost impossibly from the gloom. Her presence was sudden and silent, yet it carried a weight, a sense of purpose that made John's stomach tighten. She asked if he was waiting for a certain train. When he nodded, she said it would not be arriving until the following day. She offered him a place to stay, a meal and a room at her house about an hour's walk through the forest. John, exhausted and hungry, gratefully accepted. The path through the forest was darker than night itself. The trees stretched upward like long skeletal fingers, their branches scratching at the icy wind. Shadows moved at the edge of his vision, though he knew it was only the trees. Still, a creeping sense of being watched gnawed at him. The old woman walked ahead, quiet, her silhouette shifting in the weak glow of the lantern she carried.
By the time they reached her small two-story home, John's legs ached and his stomach growled with emptiness. Inside, the dim glow of oil lamps illuminated the room. She served him hot borscht, the savory aroma temporarily masking the unease curling in his chest. And that's when he noticed. She wasn't a woman at all. It was a man, disguised with clever clothing and age, his face lined, yet expressionless. John didn't have the energy to pry further. After eating, John was led upstairs to a tiny room containing a single bed. The door clicked shut and was locked behind him. Silence enveloped the room. He called out, but there was no answer. Anxiety pressed down on him like a physical weight. He needed to relieve himself and crawled under the bed in the dark, hoping to find a chamber pot. Instead, his hands encountered something cold, heavy, and horrifying, a body hidden beneath the bed. Panic surged. The window was nailed shut. He realized that if he stayed, he would almost certainly die. But breaking the window might alert his captor. There was no choice. With trembling hands, he lifted the body onto the bed, covering it with the blanket, and slipped under the bed himself, barely daring to breathe. Hours passed. He heard slow, deliberate footsteps climbing the stairs. The lock clicked. The door creaked open. Shadows moved across the dim light spilling from the hallway. Then came sickening, bone-chilling thuds. Someone was bashing the body with a large crowbar. The sound echoed through the tiny room like a grotesque percussion of violence. The crowbar clattered to the floor, and silence returned. The footsteps descended the stairs, fading into the distance. When John finally emerged from under the bed, he seized the crowbar and quietly pried the window open. He tossed his suitcase out first, then climbed through himself, not caring about the height, only about what was behind him. He ran blindly into the field beyond, heart hammering, eyes darting from movement in the darkness. The forest seemed alive with whispers and shadows. Every snap of a twig made him jump. Finally, distant lights revealed a highway. Military and transport trucks offered salvation. He flagged down a ride to another village where he could safely catch a train. He never reported the incident. In the Soviet Union at the time, even the victim could have faced punishment. He simply thanked God for his survival. From that night onward, John never traveled alone, never trusted appearances, and never forgot the cold, dark forest, the footsteps, and the hollow eyes of the man who had almost claimed him. Even now, decades later, the thought of that night still sends shivers down his spine. The forest, the darkness, and the quiet horror lurking just beyond the light. He knows it could be waiting for anyone careless enough to trust the shadows.
This all began about 2 weeks after I bought my very first home in December of 2010. I was 22 years old, and for the first time in my life, I was living completely alone. The thrill of independence was intoxicating, but it was accompanied by a gnawing unease that I couldn't quite shake. The house was quiet in a way that felt almost unnatural, the kind of silence that presses against your ears and makes the walls feel closer than they should. It was exciting, terrifying and overwhelming all at once. About 9 or 10 days after moving in, my mom and sister convinced me to visit a local animal shelter. They had spotted a cocker spaniel in rough shape, a thin, abused former breeding dog with severely matted fur and a jittery, skittish demeanor. Something about him tugged at my heart. I brought him home that same day and named him Jack Donnie. 30 Rock fans out there would understand. At the time, he was a little, fragile thing, weighing only 12 pounds, suffering from worms and wary of human touch. He had clearly been mistreated for most of his life. I had no idea that less than a week later, this tiny, fragile creature would prove to be my absolute lifesaver. The house I had purchased wasn't in the safest neighborhood, though it backed up to an elementary school playground and had a few security cameras pointing directly toward the backyard. I figured that offered at least a small sense of protection. It was a couple of days before Christmas, and my office was closed for the holidays, leaving me home alone in a house that already felt strangely eerie during the long winter nights. The layout of the house was odd. My kitchen table sat right by a window that overlooked the front porch. Standing on the porch, you could cast a shadow across the blinds. The front door was at a 90-degree angle to that window. Across from the kitchen was a second living area, with a side door that had a half window attached, the only window in the house without blinds. I was sitting at the kitchen table, casually sorting through my mail, when a shadow passed over my bills. My stomach immediately tightened. Even with the blinds down, it was clear someone was far too close to my window. My body tensed as an instinctive chill crawled up my spine. I didn't know why, but something about this felt wrong. No one should have been at my door, and I hadn't heard a car or been expecting visitors. Quietly, I slipped off my stool and crouched down, peeking through the tiny gap in the blinds. That's when my heart nearly leapt into my throat. 2 men were standing on my porch. The first man was huge, easily over 6 feet tall, broad, wearing a white t-shirt and jeans. He had his back to me, facing my front door, making it impossible to see his face. The second man was smaller, wearing a red baseball cap and an absurdly oversized red shirt. Unlike the first man, I could clearly see his face, though that didn't make him any less threatening. For a fleeting second, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe they had a legitimate reason for being there. A few days earlier, someone claiming to be a neighbor had come by looking for a lost dog. Maybe this was something similar. But then I heard the bigger man mutter something under his breath, a phrase that sent a spike of terror through me. Red-shirted guy turned and disappeared from view. I leaned left, craning to see where he went, and my blood ran cold. He was moving toward the side door, the weakest point in my house. It was old, flimsy, and had single-pane glass from when the house was built in 1955. If he wanted in, that door was his easiest entry. And just as that horrifying thought hit me, both men started pounding on the door simultaneously. The sound of their fists striking the door reverberated through the house, shaking the walls and rattling my nerves. I froze, unsure of what to do next. And then, out of nowhere, Jack erupted into action. That tiny, abused cocker spaniel, who had flinched at every noise in the days since I brought him home, completely lost his mind. He let out the most ferocious, blood-curdling snarl, baring his teeth, and tore across the room toward the side door. His barking was relentless, echoing through every corridor in the house, while his claws scraped against the floor like nails on a chalkboard. I had never seen him act like that. In an instant, the timid little dog had transformed into a fierce protector, ready to defend his home and me.
I could hear red-shirted guy yelling in panic, "Holy, she's got a dog!" followed by hurried footsteps. Within seconds, both men bolted, disappearing into the night like shadows fleeing a storm. I stayed frozen for a long while, my heart hammering, my hands gripping the kitchen counter until my fingers ached. Jack, still tense and growling, stood at the door, waiting for what would come next. I didn't sleep much that night. The next day, I filed a police report. Unsurprisingly, I never heard back, and as far as I know, those men never returned. I ended up moving out of that house in 2015, but I never forgot that night. More importantly, I never forgot what Jack did for me. I firmly believe he saved my life. If he hadn't been there, if they hadn't heard him, those men likely would have made it inside. I was alone, young, and my house had glaring weak points. Jack has been treated like a king ever since. He is the gentlest, sweetest dog in the world and even loves children. He has never shown aggression toward anyone, except that one night. But I know, deep down, he recognized me as his person the moment I brought him home, and he would do anything to protect me. So, to white shirt and red shirt, wherever you are, let's never meet again. Because Jack is still here, and I have the distinct feeling he hasn't forgotten you either. If you ever return, you'll find that the small, timid dog you once underestimated is far more terrifying than you could imagine.
When I was 11, I experienced one of the most terrifying moments of my life, an event that still sends shivers down my spine every time I think about it. It was around 9 o'clock at night, on a storm-lashed, rainy evening. I was home alone with my little brother, who was 7 at the time. Our parents had gone out, and it wasn't unusual for us to be alone for a few hours. We shared a room at the front of the house, right next to the front door, with a large window facing the street. The blinds were wide open, and the rain fell in relentless sheets, hammering against the glass like the drumbeat of some ominous signal. We were quietly reading, our little world safe and insulated, until the doorbell rang. The sudden chime made my stomach drop. I wasn't expecting anyone. My parents would have returned only through the garage or with keys. They never rang the doorbell this late. I looked outside, expecting to see their car, but all I saw was darkness, pierced by the heavy rain. Then I heard knocking, and a man's voice called out. At first, I didn't recognize it. At that age, the only male voice I knew belonged to my father, but this wasn't him. The man claimed he was selling Girl Scout cookies. My heart sank instantly. Who would sell cookies in the middle of a storm at night without a single child or box of cookies in sight? I froze, watching him from the side window near the door. A man in his late 50s, soaked from head to toe, standing there alone. The chill crawling up my spine told me that nothing about this was ordinary. Our front door had 3 locks, but none were engaged. My hands trembled as I reached for each one, hyper-aware that he could hear me moving the deadbolt. He continued knocking, repeating the same line over and over, like a predator testing the water. My mind raced. Should I call the police? Should I shout? And then a horrifying realization hit me. Our bedroom light was on, the blinds wide open, and my little brother was completely visible from the window, utterly absorbed in his book. I turned toward him, and my blood froze. The man was no longer at the door. He had moved silently with a predator's precision. He was standing directly outside the window, staring in.
My heart pounded in my chest like a drum of terror. He wasn't glancing, he was locking eyes with the only person he could see, my little brother, blissfully unaware of the danger mere inches away. Instinct took over. I flipped the light switch off and bolted to the window, slamming the blinds down as fast as I could. For a split second, in the dim glow of the storm, I caught a glimpse of his face. It was blank, calm, almost unfeeling, like he wasn't startled at all. Once the blinds were down, I ran through the house, checking every lock, closing every blind, every curtain. I instructed my brother to hide in a large closet in the middle of the house, a windowless space, without telling him why, because panic would have been disastrous. I stood in the hallway, listening. The knocking had stopped. The voice had stopped. Only the relentless rain filled the silence. I couldn't tell if he was still outside, wandering, waiting, or simply watching from somewhere hidden. For some reason, I didn't call the police or even my parents. Shock rooted me in place. I convinced myself that if I stayed quiet and still, he might leave. I don't know how long I waited. Eventually, I forced myself to check. The man was gone. No car pulling away, no footsteps, nothing. Just the rain. To this day, I don't know what he wanted. I can only guess that it wasn't cookies. He had likely been watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. If I had hesitated even slightly, if I hadn't noticed him at the window, if I had failed to lock that door in time, he could have stepped inside, and I don't want to imagine what might have happened. That night changed me forever. Since then, I have an almost obsessive need to check locks, to make sure every door and window is secured. But what haunts me most isn't that he was there, it's how close he came. The only thing that stopped him was a few seconds of awareness and quick thinking. Those seconds saved my brother's life. And that realization, that tiny margin between safety and disaster, is a terror I carry with me to this day.
I don't usually talk about this part of my life. Even at family reunions, when relatives would ask me about work, I'd change the subject or lie. For 4 years, I worked at a suicide prevention hotline, but the truth is, I never felt like it was just a job. Every time the phone rang, it wasn't a stranger on the other end. To me, it was always someone I knew, someone I loved. And every call felt like a fight against the darkness that was pulling them away. Before I even started, I was warned about how serious it would be. They told me there would be children, barely more than kids themselves, already ready to die. Children who felt like death was the only escape from poverty, abuse, or the constant torment of being different. I spoke to kids who were bullied so relentlessly that they could no longer imagine a future. Gay, trans, or simply unwanted in their own homes. Then there were the veterans. Old men, broken by war and flashbacks, living alone without families or homes, drowning in memories they couldn't escape. And sometimes even young men and women my own age or younger who had fought overseas. Soldiers who had children that barely knew them, families who adored them, and yet they couldn't carry the weight of what they had seen and done. Some of them even gave me numbers I was supposed to call after they were gone. Messages like, "Tell my wife and kids that I love them more than anything." That responsibility nearly broke me. One of those calls still echoes in my head. I managed to stall, to talk him back, to save him, but it shook me to my core. But not every call had the same ending.
Just a day later, I lost my first caller. It was so early in my career, and I was nowhere near ready. I still remember her name, Amber. Her voice was soft, tired in a way that felt deeper than exhaustion. It wasn't just her body that was tired, it was her soul. She told me plainly that she had already made her decision. Therapy hadn't worked, family didn't matter. She said she didn't want saving. She only wanted someone to be there with her when it ended. I tried everything I knew, every tactic, every question, every attempt to stall her. But Amber told me to stop. She didn't want hope. She wanted silence. I broke down. I told her I would miss her, that I cared about her. I begged her to change her mind. And I will never forget my final words. I'm here, Amber. I care about you, and I'm so sorry it's come to this. I'll remember you. I'll think of you every day, I promise. Then came silence. Just a few seconds, and then a bang, so loud that I dropped the phone from my hand. That sound is seared into me, louder than any thunder, sharper than any gunshot I'd ever heard in my life. It wasn't just a sound, it was the end of someone's world, and I was there to witness it. They forced me to take the rest of the week off, but it didn't help. I cried more than I care to admit. On a sticky note, I wrote, Amber, 03-5-13. I pinned it on my wall. That was the first of many. Because I stayed. I kept answering calls. I kept trying to be a hero. And every time I lost someone, I added another name and another date to that wall, until the wall itself became a graveyard, a silent memorial to voices I couldn't save. 4 years I lasted, 4 years of listening to broken voices, of clinging to hope that was slipping away, until I started slipping too. Dark thoughts crept into my own head, images of my own death, violent dreams that wouldn't leave me. And I realized, if I stayed, I'd become one of the names on someone else's wall. So I quit. And now I'm writing this for anyone who might find themselves in that same chair, headset on, listening to the end of someone's world. You are human. You cannot save everyone. No one can. But you can still try, and that matters more than you know. And when it becomes too heavy, when the weight of their ghosts begin to crush you, it's not weakness to walk away. They say you have to put on your own oxygen mask before you can help others. I never understood how true that was until the day I finally took mine off.
When I was just 11 years old, barely a month away from turning 12, my childhood was stolen from me in the most brutal way imaginable. My father died, suddenly, without warning. The silence that followed his absence was unbearable, and the house itself felt colder, emptier, as if the walls were mourning with me. I thought the pain of losing him would be the hardest thing I would ever face. I was wrong. My mother fell apart almost instantly. Instead of holding her children closer, she drowned herself in drugs and alcohol. Her eyes grew distant, her voice slurred, and within weeks she was a shell of the woman I once called Mom. So in truth, I didn't just lose my father that day. I lost both of my parents. The life insurance check from my father's death was given to my grandmother. At first, I thought this was a blessing. She had always been the most stable person in my life, the one I believed I could rely on. But life has a cruel way of twisting hope into despair. Shortly after my dad's death, my grandmother's husband of 10 years abandoned her for another woman. That betrayal broke her completely. And like my mother, she too spiraled. Meth, heroin, and a poisonous addiction to gambling swallowed her whole. In the beginning, she still tried to provide. Groceries would appear in the kitchen, the bills were paid, and there was at least the illusion of stability. But that illusion cracked quickly. Within 6 months, our lives were unrecognizable. The electricity was cut off, the water stopped running, the fridge stood empty. The nights were the worst. Darkness pressing against the windows, silence broken only by the sound of my siblings' stomachs growling. I was the oldest, and I felt the crushing weight of responsibility that no child should ever carry. I began to notice my grandmother stealing our food stamps, selling them for drugs or gambling debts. No one in that house worked, and yet the drugs kept flowing. I knew she received her Social Security check every month, and that became my secret opportunity. At night, when she was passed out, I would sneak into her room, heart pounding, and take whatever cash I could find. Sometimes it was all of it. When there was no cash left, I would take the drugs she bought and sell them to local addicts. At first, I wasn't thinking of myself. I split the money among my siblings. I bought snacks from vending machines at school so they wouldn't go hungry, or walked up to Walmart to buy clothes, then lied to my grandma that they were donations. I remember one Christmas that still feels like a knife in my chest. She didn't get us anything, not one toy, not one gift. On Christmas Eve, she handed us cheap notebooks from the Dollar Tree. I slipped $80 into each notebook before giving them to my siblings, making them believe Santa hadn't forgotten us. The smiles on their faces were worth every lie. But innocence has a way of fading, especially when surrounded by darkness. By the time I turned 13, the lines began to blur. I started keeping more of the money for myself. Weed, alcohol, cigarettes, they became my escape from the nightmare I was living. It felt like I was slipping into the same darkness that had consumed my mother and grandmother. Our home, if you could even call it that anymore, turned into a haven for the broken and the addicted. At any given time, there were 4 or more strangers, dope fiends, crashing on our floors, slumped in corners, or wandering the halls at night. The smell of smoke and sweat never left the air. Sometimes I would wake up to the sound of whispers in the kitchen, the clinking of glass pipes, or the unsettling laughter of people I didn't know. Our house became the most notorious drug den in the neighborhood, a place people entered but rarely left quickly. 2 months before my 14th birthday, everything came crashing down. Social services finally stepped in, and me and my siblings were placed into DHS custody. I thought maybe things would get better, that we would be safe at last. Years passed, and now we've all aged out of the system, except for my youngest brother, who's still only 16. My mother and grandmother eventually got clean, but the scars remain. Now here's the truth that still weighs on me like a ghost clinging to my shoulders. My grandma often tells me stories about how her so-called friends stole from her. That's why she couldn't pay the bills, why we went without food, why there were no clothes or gifts. She speaks with bitterness, convinced that it was them who drained her dry. And in some ways, she's not wrong. Those addicts did take advantage of her. But she doesn't know the full truth. She doesn't know that it was me, her grandchild, sneaking into her room, stealing her money, taking the very cash that could have bought us groceries. I tell myself I did it to survive, that I did it for my siblings.
And at first, that was true. But later, it was also for me, for my own escape. And that's the confession I've never spoken out loud until now. I think my grandma is a good person deep down, someone who was broken by tragedy and betrayal. But the question that gnaws at me is this: should I tell her? Should I reveal that the bad friend who stole from her all those years wasn't a stranger, but me? Or should I keep this secret buried forever, hidden in the shadows of the past? If I tell her, will it heal something, or destroy whatever fragile piece we've managed to rebuild? That's the weight I still carry. For as long as I can remember, I felt like something about me was different. Not in a way I could explain, more like a shadow I couldn't quite shake. A quiet, gnawing sense that I didn't fit, like I was a puzzle piece jammed into the wrong picture. Still, I never questioned my family. I had a father who loved me, a mother who cared for me, siblings who treated me as their own. I thought I belonged. But a month ago, that fragile illusion shattered. And now I find myself wishing I had never uncovered the truth. My mother was 25 when her life was stolen from her. She worked as an in-home nurse, the kind of person who poured every ounce of herself into caring for others, the sick, the elderly, the vulnerable. That selfless kindness defined her, and it was that very kindness that destroyed her life. There was an elderly patient she cared for, a frail woman with a grown son who still lived at home. Everyone in town whispered about him. 15 years older than my mother, a man with a reputation for being a creep, for making people feel unsafe. But reputations don't leave scars, actions do. One night, when my mother was alone, he cornered her. He overpowered her. He took something from her that she could never get back. And when it was over, he left her to pick up the shattered pieces of her soul. 2 months later, she learned she was pregnant, with me. She couldn't bring herself to end it. Maybe it was guilt, maybe denial, maybe just a paralysis born of trauma. She clung to her long-term relationship with my father, the man she loved and trusted. He had been with her for 7 years. She prayed desperately that the timing would work in her favor, that the baby would be his, that the nightmare would vanish if she just believed hard enough. But deep down, I think she already knew the truth. For 3 years, she raised me with my father, holding on to a hope that was already cracked and bleeding. For 3 years, she carried a secret that nearly crushed her. And then, her attacker returned. He knew. He used my existence as leverage. He blackmailed her, threatened her, twisted her trauma into a weapon. He demanded she give in to his sick desires, or he would tell my father, take me away, ruin everything. For 3 years, she endured that torment in silence, until she couldn't anymore. When she finally confessed to my father, she expected to lose him. After all, how do you tell the man you love that the child he's raised, the son he's claimed, isn't his at all? That the boy is the product of violence? But my father, my real father in every way that matters, stayed. He was broken, yes. He admitted later that the truth nearly destroyed him.
Realizing that his firstborn wasn't biologically his wrecked him in ways I can barely imagine. But he didn't throw me away. Because love, he taught me, isn't just blood. Love is choice, and he chose me. But the man who hurt my mother wasn't finished. He didn't want me out of love. He didn't care about me at all. I was only a tool, a means to keep power over my mother. He demanded visitation rights. He wanted a court order, not because he wanted a son, but because he wanted to force himself into her life forever. The court battle nearly destroyed my family. It drained them financially, emotionally, spiritually. Nearly $20,000 lost in legal fees, endless hearings, countless nights of fear. And still, the system wasn't built to protect victims. A DNA test was ordered. The results were undeniable. I was his. With no evidence strong enough to convict him, despite everyone in town knowing what he truly was, the courts could not stop him from pushing his way into our lives. The battle dragged on for years. My parents fought tooth and nail, clinging to any thread of hope. Finally, by the time I was 5, they won. He was denied parental rights. And I grew up in peace, or so I thought. For 19 years I lived in ignorance. My parents never told me the truth. My mother carried her burden silently, crying herself to sleep at night, taking scalding showers to wash away a filth that water could never erase. My father carried his heartbreak too, hiding the cracks in his soul behind his strength. They both chose to protect me from the truth. Until last month. I was at work when a man walked in. Just another customer, I thought. But when he spoke, everything froze. He told me I was his son. He pulled out a birth certificate with his name on it. He showed me pictures of me as a child, images I had never seen before. He called my mother a liar. He asked me to visit him. But he never once asked who I was, what kind of person I'd become, how my life had been. He wasn't there for me. He was there to destroy them. That night, I went home and found my father, my dad, the strongest man I know, broken. He told me everything. The courts, the threats, the years of silence. The nights my mother sobbed, wishing she could scrub the blood from her body, wishing she could forget that half of me came from him. Now I can't escape it. I look in the mirror and wonder if the face staring back is his. I wonder if I carry more than his DNA, if I carry his darkness too. My greatest fear is that I'll become like him. Sometimes I even wish I'd never been born. My siblings don't know. My grandparents don't know. It's a secret my parents buried for nearly 2 decades, and now it's mine to carry too. I don't know what I'll do if he comes back. I don't know if I'll ever outrun the shadow he's left in me. But I do know this. He may have fathered me, but he is not my dad. My dad is the man who stayed, and that is something no DNA test can ever take away.
I worked at a fast food chain back in the 90s, fresh out of high school. At first, it felt like any ordinary job. Long hours, endless fryers, the smell of grease and soda. But that all changed one night when I stumbled upon something I wasn't supposed to see.
The company was in the process of phasing out old denominational gift certificates, $10, $25, $50. The system was simple. If your order didn't reach the certificate's value, you'd get the remainder in cash. $5 worth of food on a $10 certificate, you got $5 back. Innocent, right? On the surface. My manager was in charge of destroying the old certificates. He claimed he had shredded every single one, but he lied. Late one night while closing, I noticed something odd. 2 massive boxes shoved into the far corner of the dry storage room. I almost didn't want to look, but curiosity pushed me forward. The boxes were overflowing with gift certificates that were supposed to be destroyed. I froze, my pulse hammering. These weren't just a few forgotten papers. They were hundreds, maybe thousands. I grabbed them, stuffed them into trash bags, and carried them to the dumpster. But later that night, greed whispered louder than caution. I returned to the dumpster, pulled out the certificates, and brought them home. I counted them meticulously. $1,025 in certificates, mostly $10, some $25 and $50. No expiration dates. Total value, $440,000. My manager never suspected a thing. He had already reported them destroyed. Over the next 3 years, my girlfriend and I became invisible predators. We hit every franchise in our state, then neighboring states, learning the quirks of menus, the half values, the exact change we'd get back. We never kept spreadsheets, but we memorized everything. We began hoarding the change in a shoebox, watching it grow, our obsession mounting. I used part of it to buy my first car, $7,800 cash. But it wasn't just about the money. It was the thrill, the secrecy, the sense of control over a small, invisible empire that no one else knew about. The certificates became a world of their own, fragments of stolen power that existed only between us. There were moments of paranoia. I'd glance over my shoulder in a store, imagining cameras hidden in corners, managers watching, co-workers whispering. Every transaction felt like a risk, a delicate dance on the edge of discovery. The thrill was addictive. We became meticulous, calculating every order, memorizing the exact cashbacks for obscure menu items, even the smallest extras. We laughed, we hoarded, we sometimes felt guilty, but mostly we felt alive in a way no paycheck ever gave. The certificates weren't cash, they were pieces of someone else's world that had fallen into our hands. And for a while, it felt like we could control it all. A few things people asked after I shared this story years later. 1, we could hit 10 to 12 stores in a day, driving 5 to 6 hours straight. Both of us would use certificates, and it was surprisingly efficient. 2, the only cameras were at registers and takeout windows, nothing in the storage or back areas. 3, the manager never suspected us, or at least never treated us differently. 4, each certificate had a generic code, nothing traceable. All 25 certificates shared the same code. 5, even after they stopped selling the certificates, the stores were instructed to honor them. They were prepaid, not coupons. And most importantly, there's a limit to how many kids' ice cream cones one can eat before the thrill of the scheme turns into obsession. By the end, it wasn't just about money anymore. It was about secrecy, about power, about knowing we held a hidden world in our hands that no one could touch. But the obsession took its toll. I started imagining what would happen if we were caught. Nightmares of managers confronting us, auditors knocking on doors, police investigating. We were prisoners of our own game.
Even now, decades later, I remember that smell of fries and grease, the feel of those paper certificates in my hands, the thrill of bending the rules. It was a secret empire built on shadows and curiosity, and for a time, it felt like we were untouchable. But the memory carries a weight, because I know how close we came to losing it all, and the thrill is inseparable from the fear it brought.
I had always known that marriage would be hard. Everyone warns you as you stand at the altar, but you don't truly understand it until you are trapped in its shadows, until the honeymoon glow fades and real life claws its way in. My marriage wasn't defined by one catastrophic event. It was a slow erosion, a creeping fracture of small betrayals, exhaustion, and relentless routine. The weight of raising 4 young children, the unyielding stress of work, the endless laundry, the scarcity of time, these cracks grew silently between us. The warmth once there had dulled, replaced by cold silences and quiet resentments that hung in the air like fog. Sometimes, late at night, I would lie awake listening to the house breathe around me. The soft hum of the refrigerator, the faint creak of the floorboards, every sound reminded me of the distance between us. I remembered the early days, when her laughter could light up a room, when our whispered dreams felt like promises carved in stone. Now, those memories felt like relics from a life that no longer existed. I won't lie, I had thought about leaving. Not seriously, not with the conviction to act, but in those moments when the weight of our life felt unbearable, I imagined a world without the sharp words, without the lingering hostility, without the invisible chains of our fractured home. And then she got sick. The cancer diagnosis hit like a freight train. Suddenly, the anger, the resentment, the frustrations, they all dissolved in the face of something unbearably real. But she changed too, not in the way I had imagined. Instead of softening, she lashed out, like a storm that had been bottled up for years, finally freed. She became cruel in ways I couldn't understand, picking fights over nothing, tearing me down whenever possible. One night, through her tears, she confessed. She was angry at herself, angry that she would leave, angry that she would make me a single father to 4 children under the age of 13. Her shame had twisted into venom, a storm that poured onto me without restraint. I bore it all, every cruel word, every cold shoulder, every wound she inflicted. I took it, because I loved her. I became her caretaker. I carried her when she lost the strength to walk, soothed her when she felt weak and ugly, wiped away her tears, whispered love into the darkest hours of her nights. I held her hand as the sickness ate through her, felt her trembling in my arms, and felt my own spirit splinter with every labored breath she took. Those months aged me 10 years in both body and soul. And then, as abruptly as it had begun, she was gone. I thought the worst was over. The grief, the emptiness, the struggle of raising 4 children alone. I thought that would be the hardest part. But I was wrong. In the weeks after her funeral, as I sifted through her things, handling the soul-crushing details of death, closing accounts, sorting finances, I discovered something far worse. Hidden in a separate email account, she had been plotting against me. Divorce, custody arrangements, legal strategies to make me a weekend father, plans to dismantle my life piece by piece. These weren't remnants of old anger. They were from the weeks before her diagnosis. She had planned to abandon me, to take my children,
to erase everything we had built together. I sat there, staring at the screen, shaking, my breath shallow. The betrayal cut deeper than any disease could. Every act of care, every sleepless night, every ounce of love I had poured into those final months, it had been for a woman who had already decided to destroy me. She had let me believe in her regret, in her love, while secretly orchestrating my ruin. I had carried her up the stairs, bathed her when she could no longer lift her own arms, fed her when her hands shook too much to hold a spoon, whispered comfort into her ears, all while she had planned to cut me from her life. The house felt different now, heavy and suffocating. I could almost hear her presence in the rooms, taunting me, her absence pressing in like a dark tide. I wanted to scream, to hate her, to claw at the walls, but there was nothing left. No confrontation, no resolution, no apology. Only the bitter, unrelenting truth. I grieved her, I cared for her, I loved her, and she had already decided I wasn't worth saving, even from myself. I walk through the empty rooms at night, hearing echoes of laughter that never return. Sometimes I see shadows out of the corner of my eye, or feel her gaze lingering when no one can be. I know it's only my mind playing tricks, but the fear, the betrayal, the sense of being watched never leaves. I wake every morning knowing the woman I once loved, the one I carried through her darkest days, had long ago decided I wasn't worth saving. I won't tell my children, not now, maybe never. They have already lost their mother. They don't need to know she had plotted to erase their father, to shred our family before fate intervened. Let them keep their memories intact. Let them believe in love, in family, in the life we shared. But I have no such luxury. I wake each day with a weight pressing on my chest, a constant reminder that the person I trusted most in the world had spent her last days secretly destroying me. And so I live with it, alone, haunted, betrayed. The home we built is still standing, the children still laugh and sleep and grow, but I carry a darkness within me that no one will ever see. A darkness born from love, from devotion, from betrayal so absolute it has no name. And every night, I wonder if the love I gave her, the life I tried to save, was ever real to her at all.
When I was 11, I lived in a cramped, cluttered apartment with my mom, stepdad, and younger sister. The building wasn't a traditional apartment complex. It was more like a large house that had been divided into 3 units. My family occupied the top floor, and 2 other families lived below. Both had children, but I quickly gravitated toward the girls in the bottom unit, aged 9 and 10. We were closest in age, and during long summer days, I spent countless hours at their apartment while my mom slept through the day from working night shifts. Their home was chaotic, cluttered, and filled with stacks of toys, books, and what felt like a library of every Olsen twin movie ever made. It was overwhelming, almost suffocating, but I felt safe there, or as safe as a child could in that environment. The older girl once asked if I could spend the night, but her mother flatly refused. I didn't understand the strictness at the time, only the sharp edge of tension in her mother's voice. The first strange, uncomfortable moments began quietly. One afternoon, their father came home from work and asked me to sit on his lap while stroking my hair.
I froze, unsure, and soon after, the mother, furious, sent me home. Even at that age, something in me knew it was wrong, but I didn't fully understand the danger yet. Then came the evening that would haunt me forever. It was just before sunset, and the girls and I played outside. The oldest asked me to sit by their bedroom window. "Just listen," she said. She didn't explain what I would hear. She only asked me to witness. I obeyed, heart hammering, my stomach tight with fear and confusion. Inside that room, the sound of her pleading carved itself into my memory. I heard her begging her father to stop. I heard her cries, her terror, every desperate word and sob. Time stretched endlessly, each second heavier than the last. I could feel my body frozen, my mind screaming, but I didn't know how to act. And then my stepdad called me home for dinner, breaking the horrifying spell of that moment. Sitting at the table, 11 years old, I felt sick to my soul. I was frozen, unable to move, unable to speak. My stepdad noticed, gently pressed me, and I finally told him everything I had witnessed. That night, we spent hours at the police station. In the following days, the man was arrested, tried, and sentenced to 12 years for the assault of his 2 daughters. I never had to testify. He pleaded guilty. The girls were gone soon after, and I never saw them again. Their names have faded from my memory, but the man's name, the horror he caused, remains indelibly etched in my mind. Years later, curiosity compelled me to look him up online. I searched for any record of his time in prison, any trace of the girls, anything about what became of them. What I discovered was shocking. After his release, the man was burned alive in his own home by a woman. The article didn't clarify if she was related to him, but the thought lingered. Perhaps someone he had harmed took justice into their own hands. Even now, I cannot escape the memory of those cries, the helplessness of being a witness, the weight of knowing what evil lurks in the world. I think of those girls, of their fear, and hope that they somehow found healing, somewhere far from that house. But the trauma lingers. The injustice of how little time he served compared to the lives he destroyed, it never feels enough. 6 years per child? 12 years total? It is meaningless against the suffering, the fear, the stolen innocence. That man's name is the only thing I will never forget, and it will stay with me for the rest of my life. Even as an adult, I can feel the echoes of that apartment, the cluttered rooms, the piles of movies, the smell of stale air, and the sharp edge of fear that never left me. I carry it with me every day, a constant reminder that evil can hide behind ordinary walls, behind familiar faces, and that sometimes children bear witness to horrors no one should ever endure.